Good morning.
Recording in progress.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the March 19th, 2026 ARB meeting. Can we have a roll call, please?
Yes, Chair Chen.
Present.
Vice Chair Adcock.
Present.
Board Member Hirsch. Present. Board Member Jojar.
Present.
Board Member Rosenberg. For the record, we have quorum.
Thank you. And next is agenda changes, additions, and deletions for this meeting.
No changes planned for this meeting.
Okay, thank you. And we will move on to the public comments. If you have anything you want to talk about that is not on the agenda, you can talk about it now. And if you want to talk something that is on the agenda item, then you will have time for it later today. Okay, do we have any public comments?
To the chair, I have no request to speak on this item, and I have not received any public comment cards.
Thank you. And to the public, so Board Member Rosenberger just joined us. Good morning. All right, so we will move on to the city official report.
All right, well, good morning and welcome to our March meeting. Let me share my screen. All right, I just want to provide some brief updates of the council meeting that occurred earlier this week on Monday. We had 3 large projects that were approved. 2100 King Road, the Builder's Remedy Townhome project that was approved, as well as a planned community rezone at 4075 El Camino Way, and our bird-friendly design ordinance as well. So some heavy lifts for the department. Moving on to some upcoming items, the April 2nd meeting has been canceled due to a lack of items. Our April 16th meeting will have a few items, the last one depending on full board attendance for the chair and vice chair elections, but we're anticipating of taking forward the Lot T Streamlined Housing Development Project, as well as the California Avenue Outdoor Activation and those standards that follow for that. And I can entertain any further questions, but just want to note that we are planning to cancel that 6/18 meeting due to a lack of quorum. As we get a little bit closer, we can potentially identify maybe an alternative meeting date or a special meeting if there's items that need to be heard. And as always, if there's any planned absences, please direct that to staff's attention.
All right, thank you so much. Any questions to the staff at this moment? No? Then we will move on to our action item today, which is the San Antonio Road Area Plan, Land Use and Transportation Alternatives Study Session. So I will hand it over to the staff for staff presentation. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair and board members. My name is Robert Kane. I'm a principal planner with the Department of Planning and Development Services. I'm here to present some alternatives that are part of our phase 2 of the San Antonio Road Area Plan. We previously came before the Architectural Review Board last fall when we were starting out this portion of the plan. We provide you with a lot of information in your packets, and we're happy to discuss anything that is in the packets, but my presentation today is going to focus in on some of the key areas of the plan. I'll be available for questions at the end, and we also have our consultants from Raby & Associates that will be available for questions as well. Next slide, please. So today I'm going to give you a brief project update. We'll talk about the overall design strategy that we're taking to the project. We'll talk about 2 of the key land use alternatives in North Fabian and in what we call the CTI sub-area at Commerce, Transport, Streets, and Industrial Avenue. And then we'll talk about some of the mobility alternatives for San Antonio Road. Next slide, please. So just as a recap, or for those who might be listening in that aren't as familiar with the plan, the goal is to create a 20-year vision for a 275-acre area in South Palo Alto. to create a more livable community, improve mobility and safety throughout the corridor, support sustainability goals that the city has, as well as enhance economic vitality. The plan is looking to create feasible design alternatives that can be implemented into zoning and development standards and implementation tools and strategies. Next slide, please. So this is our timeline. We have been at this plan work for about a year now. Last March is when the council approved the budget for this project. We anticipate completing the plan by early 2028. In this phase, we developed some land use and mobility alternatives throughout the plan area that we are hoping to narrow down so that in our next phase, we can focus on analysis and policy recommendations. Next slide, please. So as part of the overall design strategy, our team has divided the 275-acre area into smaller sub-areas. We're looking to redevelop with infill housing and potentially new commercial development in areas that are existing, that currently have low density commercial. We're looking to create some new open spaces or third spaces like parks and plazas with neighborhood serving retails and amenities as well. We're looking to really improve bike and ped connections in this area that is currently very auto-focused and improve safety throughout the area as well for all who travel it. And we're also looking to improve transit service. The plan area is adjacent to a Caltrain station, but there is very limited transit currently inside the plan area. So we're looking at ways of improving the transit that's there, as well as making that connection to the Caltrain station easier. Next slide, please. So for the land use alternatives, we'll go briefly over what the sub-areas are, and then we'll dive deeper into two of those. So next slide, please. The four bright colored areas are the primary sub-areas. Those are Central San Antonio Road, which is roughly from Middlefield to Charleston, excluding the greenhouse community, but also including the Toyota dealership on the other side of Middlefield. And then we also have two areas in Fabian, North Fabian and South Fabian. The North Fabian area is largely made up of the current Maxar site, as well as the other properties across Fabian. And then the South Fabian area has some key institutions like the JCC and some housing that will not be changing, but we have a lot of other applications for the other sites surrounding those properties. And then the last site is, as I mentioned, the CTI site, which is currently 1 to 2 story light industrial or services or retail that could be changing in the future. We also have some secondary sub-areas on East and West Bay Shore and Alma Street, which could see some change through the plan area. And then we identified areas like the Greenhouse in South San Antonio, which are not likely to change, as well as Green Meadow, which is not in the plan area, but is subject largely to Senate Bill 79. But we still don't anticipate much change in that area either, given the state law. Next slide, please. So we want to talk a little bit about the overall changes. Right now, there's about 800 units, residential units inside the plan area. Throughout the various scenarios, we would have a capacity to add somewhere between 3,800 and 7,400 new units to this area, depending on which alternatives are chosen. We could see all of the office and research and development parcels change, all the non-commercial could change over, and we could see that replaced with new Class A office and research and development facilities. And then we give a brief breakdown on the 4 key change areas of what those changes and use might look like. Next slide, please. So the North Fabian area is a really key area to our site, should the Maxar site redevelop. It's currently a large industrial facility. There are also in this portion of Fabian Way office buildings, some of which have been converted to private schools. Right now, there is not adequate bike facilities or traffic calming, although there is a plan to address that as well. There's interest in redeveloping the Maxar site potentially into a mixed density residential development. There have been discussions about having townhomes or apartments or a combination of those. Currently, we don't have any applications in, but we're looking at what the right mix might be for that area, as well as it's really important to the city to create some publicly accessible parks or other outdoor spaces in this area that does not currently have any of those, and create a more walkable block structure because it's a really long block, perhaps with bike and ped only paseos. Next slide, please. So our team has created multiple scenarios, and the way you should look at these alternatives is, we could have one from each of the 3 different columns, A, B, and C. We're looking at what is the right land use mix. Should it only be residential or residential and neighborhood serving retail allowed in the area? Or should we continue to allow some sort of incubator, flex space, research and development in the portion of the plan near 101? We're also talking about what is the right density. Right now, 40 dwelling units per acre is what is required, which would allow some townhomes as low as 18 to 22 dwelling units per acre if combined with apartment buildings that are at a higher density. But we could also look into having a higher minimum density and pushing more for taller apartment-style buildings or more dense townhomes in that mix. We're also asking for feedback about heights. Right now, 60 feet is the height limit. We feel like going up to 90 feet could maybe maximize mid-rise construction. And there's also a possibility, if there's appetite for it, to go to true high-rise construction. So next slide, please. In the CTI area, I mentioned before, there's a lot of lower height buildings with a lot of mix of uses, but no residential currently. There are a lot of housing element sites within this area. There's 7.2 acres of housing element sites out of approximately 25.8 acres of developable area. Next slide, please. So it's a little more challenging because we don't have one 25-acre site like the Maxar site here. We have a lot of very small lots, some of which are being consolidated or could continue to be consolidated by owners. But it's a little bit of a different problem to solve. But we're still looking at how do we create new plazas and parks within the area, create opportunity for retail services and food to create a true neighborhood here. There's also a Mountain View development project that has been submitted directly next door to this area at the Charleston Plaza, or Charleston Shopping Center, I think it's called, where the Best Buy used to be, PetSmart is. They're looking to put in a lot of office and residential and ground floor retail in that site in their current application. So how can we connect into that? How can we create shorter blocks, more walkable and bike-friendly infrastructure here, and improve the streetscape and the tree canopy in this area? Next slide, please. So one of the things that we're talking about is park space. We're not as likely to get a large park in this area because of the small parcel sizes, but we could have multiple small parks potentially. So we're looking at, should those be outward facing on Charleston? Should they be in the interior of this neighborhood? Should they be broken up into multiple small parks or try to consolidate into one slightly larger park? And how do we get this all connected into what's happening in Mountain View as well? Next slide, please. And we have 4 main development alternatives. Those have varying height limits. 2 of them don't allow office and research and development, and 2 of them do. One of them would try to keep the amount of commercial development between North Fabian and CTI static. The option 4 would allow some additional beyond what is in currently those two areas, but in no scenario are we proposing a net increase of commercial throughout the entire plan area. We're expecting to see some level of decrease, either minimal or large, depending on the scenario chosen throughout the entire plan area. Next slide, please. And for mobility alternatives, we are looking at improvements on all of the streets within the plan area. If you go to the next slide, please. We're looking to create pedestrian first design, low stress biking routes, those first last mile connections. We're also looking into parking and demand management requirements and smart corridor technology, which we think will help improve both safety and traffic flow in the area. Next slide, please. San Antonio Road itself, we've broken down into 3 different sections. One is the section between Charleston Road and 101. We plan to tie into the VTA's plan for the 101 interchange project, which is currently in the design phase. Area B is between Charleston and Middlefield. That's the area where there's the potential for the most amount of improvements to the streetscape itself, we feel. And then area C is includes down to the Caltrain, and we'll be looking at intersection improvements at NEDA as well as connections to the Caltrain itself across Alma. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the existing conditions in the left side for San Antonio Road. We have about 100-foot right-of-way through most of this section, although it does vary a little. Currently, there are 2 travel lanes in each direction and a parking lane on each side, and one approximately 5-foot sidewalk on both sides. There are no separate bike facilities. This is currently a shared path indicated currently. That is not what is recommended by the city's bicycle pedestrian transportation plan update, which is currently under review. That requests that there be a separate bikeway along this road. So our first alternative is the most direct way to get to that. It removes the parking and creates bike lanes where the parking currently is. These are technically separated, but they are at street level and on a truck route. That might not be ideal, but it could be something that we do as a first step to implement the city's policies while we think about potentially doing either Alt 2 or Alt 3. Alt 2 is a project where the 101 bound side has that change of removing the parking and having that be the bike lane. But on the Caltrain bound side, we would keep the parking and change the sidewalk to a multi-use path for cyclists and pedestrians. That would require widening that path significantly, and that would require the city acquiring additional rights of way or easements in order to make that work. It is not exactly the same as the BPTP update recommendation. Some people think that this type of mixed-use, multi-use path is preferable. Some people think it is not preferable, but it does give us the advantage of having cyclists not at the street level on a truck route and be able to head in either direction on that side of the street. Alt 3 goes a little bit farther. It would not only remove the parking, but it would move the curbs. So it would take the area that currently is parking, and it would move all of the street trees to that area. And in that area, it would also build a 2-way bike track on both sides. And then the existing sidewalk would remain and could potentially be expanded beyond the 5 feet should the city also want to acquire additional rights of way or easements in order to widen the sidewalks. So those are the 3 main alternatives that we're looking to bring forward and narrow down as this phase of the project continues. Next slide, please. In addition to that, we're looking at improvements at the Charleston Road intersection, Middlefield Road intersection, and Anita Avenue. Part of this is really driven by wanting to give the new residents an option of getting to local amenities, shopping, without having to necessarily get in their cars. But it's also really rooted in the city's Safe Routes for Schools program. Right now, the city of Palo Alto has about 70% of our students walking or biking to school. And in order to have that same option for the new residents, we're looking at ways to get them safely across San Antonio Road. There are some ideas, including tying into the 101 interchange project that would be a great separated way across San Antonio, or potentially doing a bike ped bridge at Charleston in order to get people over San Antonio Road. Next slide, please. And of course, I want to highlight that we are focused on the end of the road in our jurisdiction near the Caltrain station and providing a low-stress bikeway from San Antonio into the Caltrain and across to Mountain View. We'll be looking to coordinate with the city of Mountain View more, which we've been doing, as well as potentially Alphabet, which owns the Google X campus where Waymo is based out of, and Caltrain itself to improve a mobility hub there and perhaps make that crossing a bit easier for people. Next slide, please. So the feedback we're looking for from the ARB is what are the advantages and disadvantages of some of these approaches? Do you see advantages or disadvantages about the height limits, about allowing primarily residential or a mix of residential and office? Do you think that we should be increasing the minimum densities for the residential developments? Do you see benefits of the street level separated bike lanes versus the sidewalk level separated bike lanes? Locations, do you have opinions about the locations of parks and outdoor spaces? Should they be in the interior of neighborhoods or adjacent to major roads or co-located with shops and cafes? And what should our approach to retail be? Should there be areas where we require ground floor retail or retail-ready requirements? Or should we be allowing ground floor retail but not requiring it in the plan area? Next slide, please. So thank you. That concludes my presentation. And as I mentioned, we are here to take your feedback and answer any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. So before questions to the staff, we will move on to the public comments. To the public, if you have anything you want to say, you will have 3 minutes. Please state and spell your name. Do we have any public comments?
Through the chair, I have not received any public comment cards in person, but if there are any members of Zoom that would like to speak to this item, I would invite you to raise your hand on Zoom so I can add you to the queue. And through the chair, I have not received any raised hands on Zoom.
Okay, thank you. So back to the board, it's time to ask questions to the staff. Who want to start?
I have one overarching question just regarding the, I guess, the intent. Like, for instance, there are various sections like you've presented with different existing conditions and different goals as well. But, and then within Palo Alto as well, there's University Avenue, Cal Ave that are a little bit more mixed-use type of areas. Are there any areas, whether within Palo Alto or neighboring cities, that you're kind of thinking about emulating any of these areas, just as a mental picture?
Sure. So we're not expecting San Antonio Road itself to become like Cal Ave or University Avenue. It is still the only city truck route between 101 and Alma. So it's going to continue to have vehicle traffic that's going to make it difficult to create that kind of level of like neighborhood Main Street that Cal Ave and University serve as. But within some of the areas, I think we could have development similar to what you see near San Antonio Station on the Mountain View side. And I'll allow Chris to introduce himself. He's worked on some of those projects, so he can tell you a little bit more about how our plan area might resemble those.
Yeah, good morning. Chris Sensnig with Ramey Associates. And I think You stated it well, Robert. I think the San Antonio Center project, there are different aspects of it that I think relate very similar to this area. I think the area north of California Street towards the Caltrain, I'm blanking on its marketing name right now, but that I think is a very good example of the park and open space in there. I think is a very good example of what we can expect as one of the open spaces in the CTI area, and potentially one of the a smaller open space in the Maxar site. There, it's about a half-acre park, and there's a road leading off of California Street north to the park that's a little bit wider. It has kind of a little plaza and a little bit of what was supposed to be retail, but is actually just residential amenity space right now. And that project is about 5 stories, 5 to 6 stories. And so that kind of represents the lower density. I think as you get closer to El Camino Real, you're seeing more 7 to 8 story buildings. And I think that is, really of the scale that we can expect along San Antonio and the South Fabian area, and I think in the CTI area.
And if I may, Jennifer Armour, Assistant Director, the one additional point that I would add is we have a vision that was kind of given to us to lead off this effort to create new neighborhoods, to improve mobility options, particularly for pedestrians and bicyclists in this area, to make it a safer place for the new community that'll come out of this plan. And so actually turning the question back to you, that is part of what this discussion of alternatives is what is the city's vision for this area? What could it become? And finding other examples as a model to see what could realistically occur is a very helpful part and has been part of some of the discussions. But at this point with alternatives, that's really what we're going to lead towards.
I have one other question, if I can jump in with one more, regarding, I think in the mobility slides, we're talking about obviously biking, walking to schools. This area, as far as school district-wise, it's right on the border of Palo Alto, Mountain View. Are all of these neighborhoods in Palo Alto Unified School District or Mountain View? Is there a overlap? How does that go? And so where are the kids going to school?
Yeah, unfortunately, the school district boundary was created before this area was annexed into either Palo Alto or Mountain View. So the city boundary doesn't exactly match the school district boundary. A majority of the children on, let's say, Fabian would be going to Palo Alto schools. The children in the CTI area right now, if the boundaries don't move, would be going some to Palo Alto, some to Mountain View Westminster School District. We've looked into whether or not we should or could change that. There is a process. It requires the school districts themselves to want to change the districts. It requires a vote of anyone who would be affected by the change of district. And then it requires approval by the county, by a county board. The city can support, but we don't have a role in that change. So for now, we are continuing to plan for children going to schools in both school districts.
So is it safe to say that San Antonio Road is kind of the boundary and north and south, or is it very jagged?
It's a little jagged.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to jump in here really quick, just with a clarification point. So you're telling me that because there's this portion of the parcel that is between Palo Alto and Mountain View school districts, Palo Alto can decide to build something that's got 300 new residences that actually wouldn't go into Palo Alto Unified School Districts, they'd go into Mountain View school districts, and Mountain View has absolutely no say against it?
So
Palo Alto's building can directly impact how Mountain View school districts are being, how many kids are going into their schools?
the short answer is yes, because the planning authority, the ability to issue building permits lies with the city. not with the school district,
Right.
but then the school district is responsible for running the schools, not the city. So because that's separated that way, it does create this weird situation.
How unique is this situation to Palo Alto specifically? Or is basically everywhere else in Palo Alto, if you're in Palo Alto, you go to Palo Alto Unified?
It's very common for a lot of agencies because the school district boundaries are set up completely independent from the city. Often the school district name is associated with the agency that most of it is in, but the lines rarely line up directly with the city boundary lines.
Fascinating, okay.
For other districts in Palo Alto, I don't know the details, but yeah, this is one where some kids will be crossing San Antonio depending on where they're being sent for their school.
Got it, okay, thank you.
I have a question about the number of the units that we plan here. So for the housing element, it is allocated about 1,600 units. And then the existing condition is about 800 units. And based on our development analysis, the redevelopment potential is up to 3,800 to 7,400. So is there like a goal that we want to achieve? Like, is it between the housing element requirements and the 3,000, 4,000, or it's all it's all depend on the individual builders or developers?
So in the end, it'll depend on individual developers. The city doesn't own any of these parcels. The city only owns the streets and sidewalks, the rights of way. I would also add that this plan is looking as a 20-year plan, whereas the housing element, the current cycle is only through 2031. So it's only for another 5 years. So we would like to see more potential than just what is in the current housing element cycle. But it's an open question about how much more beyond that we should be planning for. And what we're doing, and what we do as planners is we build the capacity for this level of development unless there is an actual city run or funded project like Lot T. Almost all housing that's built in the city is through private developers, right? Without the city having much input beyond regulating and making sure that they meet our requirements.
Okay, so which means like the housing elements will be at least the minimum unit number, new unit number we will create it in this area, is it correct?
So we already have the capacity for the current housing element cycle that it was already taken through rezoning that happened after the housing element was adopted. So we already have that much capacity for the housing element. We're looking about how much additional capacity we should create in the plan area.
But it is important in this discussion to understand the difference between the capacity that we're providing in terms of the regulations and the projections for what we have justified as likely to redevelop and what actually will get built. Even with those housing element sites, while we have analyzed them and provided justification accepted by the state that it's likely to be redeveloped in the next 8 years, we don't actually have control to ensure that that construction occurs. Right, that number of units or that distribution actually occurs. We're just trying to set it up in this area to provide, in some cases, incentives and things that will encourage housing, because we've identified this as a good area for new neighborhoods, new housing for the city's housing goals.
Then does transportation department also be involved in, like, say, if there are, in the future, there are 3 times or 5 times of the existing units will be in this location, will the street still, I saw the mobility analysis, we still keep the 2-lane on each direction. So in that case, do we have any analysis with the high volume of the traffic that will be increased?
Yeah, as planners, we often focus a lot on land uses, density, height, et cetera. But for this plan, the mobility options are of equal importance because, there's only so much space There needs to be the capacity still maintained for the truck route, but at the same time, we need to allow people to move and to align with the city's sustainability goals and supporting these new communities. It's critical for us to build that capacity through support of other mobility options. So having the safe and comfortable bike and ped facilities is a critical part of ensuring that there's still the capacity, even if additional travel lanes are not added.
Okay, thank
I
you.
would add also transit to that as well. And
Connection to transit
yeah,
as well.
or additional transit as well along the corridor. And I'll add that we also work closely with our colleagues in the Office of Transportation in developing all facets of this plan.
And BTA.
And yeah, VTA is also part of our technical advisory group.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I have a follow-up question to that one as well. So part of what you guys were saying was that you're looking to incentivize, right, development and growth, because you guys are obviously not in control of it, you're not the people building it. So in order to try and hit these goals and the timelines that, excuse me, that Palo Alto is looking to do it, the incentivizing would be allowing developers to come in and have potentials for more profit. Is that an accurate way to say that? If they feel like they can get more bang for their buck, they're more likely to build here versus someplace else. Okay, on that note, we've seen projects in the past where oftentimes the ARB wants that retail at ground space, and we found that that has a lot of complications. Could you guys touch on that a little bit, and so we can better understand, like, if we're recommending something that has to have retail versus allowed to have retail but doesn't require it, is that a complication that comes up for developers, and how that's phrased and how that's done? Because apologies for speaking for the board, but we've pretty consistently wanted retail in a lot of these mixed-use developments. We find that that's a much more vibrant setting for people to live in versus just all residential, especially in these high-density areas. But by requiring it to be in these developments, would that actually be a stumbling block?
So I'll give a quick answer, and then I'll let Chris give a more detailed answer. There's some complications with ground floor retail. It works great in places where there's a lot of foot traffic, and it works great in places where there's like a destination for people to drive to. But when you have sites that aren't having people walk up and down them all day and don't have the parking to support the retail, they can sometimes not be as successful. One building alone isn't normally enough to support the ground floor retail. Normally they need additional people from the neighborhood there. So, we're looking at where it might be appropriate. If we're building a new neighborhood, there should probably be some ground floor retail in that neighborhood, so people don't have to leave the neighborhood to get it. But does that mean that every single building needs to have ground floor retail? Maybe not, but I'll let Chris talk about what we've seen.
Perfect. So, and also on that note, if the whole stretch of ground level is retail, people are like, oh, okay, I'm going to go here and here and here. I'm going to pick up my coffee. I'm going to go get my pet's toenails groomed, right? Like whatever, because it's all retail. But if you have just one island of retail, yeah, nobody's going to walk there. So it's this moment where you're saying, okay, build the retail and people will walk it, but they won't go to the retail if they're not walking that area. So it's a little bit of a which comes first and how do you best regulate and incentivize that? So please.
Yeah, I mean, you're right on about a lot of that and how we're kind of approaching this. There are definitely areas in the plan that we think retail would be extremely difficult to be successful. I think along San Antonio Road, that's one of those places. It's just not a very pedestrian-oriented place. There also isn't really a place for people to go and be. It's really an in-between place. And so what we're really kind of focusing on is how do you create the new neighborhoods and have that third place that isn't only just ground floor retail, but how do you connect that to other public places, mainly new open spaces? And so we're really looking at the CTI area as a place that we feel that could be successful. Now, that is complicated with the Mountain View part of it and the Palo Alto part. So we think flexibility is kind of key here between because, it probably can't hold 2 little nodes of retail. It can probably hold 1. So there's a little bit of flexibility, but that's an area that we believe that, is really important to have a certain amount of neighborhood serving retail that serves that new mixed-use community. I think the other question that we have in the alternatives is kind of about if the Maxar site redevelops. It's a big site. It's potentially about 1,000 units, and it includes, and then just in the South Fabian area, there's another area. So I think a question is, can that type of area have a small amount of neighborhood serving retail? And I think, the question is still up on that. And so, the developers will always say flexibility, flexibility. Yes, we want to do it. We want to create an amenity for our future residents. But, it's often a very small amount. So
Have you found any adjacency with keeping retail sort of near these outdoor spaces, having adjacency between shops and a park? Does that seem to provide more success, or is that more of a hindrance because everyone's conglomerating on the same spot all at the same time and fighting for parking? What have you seen in your experience?
it's typically, I think, on a lot of the new mixed-use projects, it's a plus, because you're focusing programming and bringing people together, and then they take advantage of those businesses. I think, a perfect example is a cafe or an ice cream shop that is near a park. It's serving multiple people in different ways, and the draw to the park is the important thing that helps sustain this kind of neighborhood serving retail. And it's also really part of what we're trying to do here is create that third place. Right? How do you create real nodes of activity that become the heart of these new communities?
Right. And then last question, I'll pass it back to the rest of the board, is sort of how we get offices in the mix as well. And part of the reason that I'm sort of going down this line of thinking is L'Eixample Grid that everyone knows in Barcelona is a very successful example of mixed-use community where it's basically ground level is retail, second floor is offices, and then 3 through 6 is residential. So is there any sort of concept that emulating something like that would be a successful moment, or are we really looking to sort of have, here's a node and everything else is residential, right? Is the goal to really predominantly increase the residences and then sprinkle through some of these other little amenities like office spaces or outdoor spaces or retail, or is it really to build something from the ground up that is sort of more cohesively all of these different elements?
I mean, in the CTI area, there's a property owner that wants to build office and build a mixed-use community. Because of the building types and the construction types in the United States, we don't often see this vertical stacking unless you're into high-rise construction.
Sure.
So I think in the CTI area, we would expect something similar to what has already been proposed in Mountain View, where you have an office building, you have a parking structure, and you have residential buildings. And it's not a big area, it's 25 acres, so it would be mixed throughout the area, but you would see the uses split horizontally, with the exception of the retail, which would probably be located on the ground floor of the residential buildings.
Okay. All right, that's what I've got for now. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the plans, very nicely described. Of course, there are missing pieces still, but well done. Sort of sticking with the CTE area, you've evidently been talking to some owner there. Is it the major owner that's in that particular area? There seems to be one company that's has many of the properties.
Yes, and they also are the same property owner of the Mountain View parcel.
I see. when you say the Mountain View parcel, what do you mean? They own larger pieces of the CTE than where their name is located?
Just south of the CTI area is Charleston Plaza.
Oh, I get
That's
you.
10 acres.
The new project you're talking about.
Yes.
Okay, so some of the interconnections that are shown on the schemes have something to do with connecting parcels that they might be interested in continuing their own development idea there.
Correct.
Oh, that's good. Okay, that's a big plus, huge plus, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
So that they're not two separate ideas here. You know, their proposal was quite interesting, you know, in terms of the kind of massing of buildings, the circulation, and the mix of open space within it, the park space. It was really very well done and very well presented. So the thought of maybe extending that into the CTE is terrific. And the fact that they're the owners, they're immediately adjacent to them, those particular retail areas, commercial areas are pretty run down, you know. So the border is all, you know, you can imagine stretching that border. Can I ask you, in terms of how they arrange it, they keep parking in a separate parking garage, or what is the concept of that project?
The Mountain View project?
Yeah, the Mountain View one.
So the Mountain View project has a 170-foot tall, I believe 11-story, let me get that right. Yeah, about 170-foot tall, 11-story, 488,000 square foot office building and an adjacent parking structure. Mm-hmm. And in that parking structure, it has some of the commercial amenity. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to say like capital R retail. There's actually, I think, very little of it that's capital R retail. There's a daycare, other things as part of it. And then it has three residential buildings. It's actually, in a way, it's two, because one of the buildings has a parking structure or two of the buildings that have a below-grade parking structure that spans between the two buildings that the main drive goes across. And then the third residential building has both ground floor and below-grade parking. Mm-hmm. So these are, I believe they're all either 5/2 or 5/3, 7 or 8 story buildings.
Mm-hmm. So now that's a kind of mid-rise kind of.
Yeah, maxing out the mid-rise capability, yes.
Mm-hmm. And parking below grade this is a schematic plan. Have they costed out that whole project?
I mean, I'm not fully familiar with their process, but it's it's an application into the city of Mountain View.
Okay. Just because some of our thinking maybe in the CTE area really somehow would need to think about how all of that is being done, and then it could transfer some of those aspects of it. Certainly, maybe if there are open spaces there, they ought to connect in some way. And there should be some continuity of relationship between the two. So the fact that it is in the process, maybe when it gets a little further, that to know exactly what it will influence the way in which we look at the CTE project there entirely there. But the exciting part about it is, you know, that there's one owner that has a lot of sway in that area. Now, in terms of the rest of the CTE, how does that break down with ownership relative to possible?
Yeah, so I mean, the CTI area has,
okay,
the CTI area has a lot of small parcels.
Owners?
A lot of different owners.
Yes.
Now, you know, a certain percentage of them,
There's some signs
are
say
consolidated.
looking for rentals, et cetera. So some of them are weaker than others, some areas, huh?
Right. So, and, some won't want to redevelop. So, the contrast to the Mountain View project is the CTI area is likely to develop in a very different way. It's likely to develop kind of piecemeal.
Yeah.
And across time, dependent on a lot of different property owners, motivation. And so, of course, delivering the open spaces and such are going to be more difficult.
Yep.
And a bit piecemeal, but, we feel that there's great opportunity, making the connections across the blocks, connecting from the Mountain View project to the CTI neighborhood it's of course possible on Transport Avenue. We also feel there's a viable connection between Industrial Avenue and the Mountain View project, a new Paseo. But I think the building types are likely to be similar to what you're seeing in the Mountain View project, where you have, a 5, 8, or, if you guys are open to higher heights, higher office building with that will combine probably a little bit of either half subgrade or subgrade parking and probably a 9-story parking structure. That's just the way that most of these projects work out with the amount of parking that they want to provide versus the amount of floor area.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So that would be CTI, then kind of enough to talk about that. It's coming along with possibilities that also have the holdup of a mix of ownership, really, which makes the project hard to grasp as if it's a one project there. And it may be a reflection of what's possible and what's not ultimately in terms of the ownership and how secure they are in staying in the neighborhood, especially when major owner is the major actual commercial owner of in that area. There is the one commercial actually manufacturing company who they are.
In CTI, there's the small lots, right? So
Yeah.
there is an owner that owns many of those small lots, and they rent them out to a variety of uses. There isn't an overall plan, as far as I know, as to who they rent out to currently. And then we have the Maxar site on the other side, which is currently owned by
Maxar is one
Alexandria.
owner.
But has been,
Actually, it's one commercial use, or one.
currently it is, yes.
Currently, the
However-
Maxar themselves.
Right.
Only one. Yeah, that's a
So-
very different site. So, in terms of thinking about this, wouldn't that be the more likely site to be developed? You noted that you thought the CTI was, but because of the complexity of ownership and the smaller parcels.
I'm going to jump in and just say that one of the members of our community advisory group is the developer who's looking to develop in the CTI area.
Oh.
They've clearly
Yeah.
expressed an interest in doing so and are working towards that, even if it would be more complex. And we don't know exactly what the configuration.
Okay, so we open. But similarly, I don't know, it's not Maxar themselves that is,
So Alexandria, that owns that Maxar site, is currently, I believe still currently, looking to see if anyone is interested in purchasing the property from them.
I see.
So it's a little up in the air. If they do sell, who buys it and what are they hoping to do with the property is what we'll have to see. But I don't think that we should hold up the plan for that. I think we should talk about, as a city, what would we like to see here? Should it redevelop? Obviously, there's a possibility that it stays as it is for some period of time, which is also fine. But if it ever does redevelop, we need to be ready to say, this is what the city wants to see on that property.
So in that one, it seemed obvious that the Maxar is a very busy organization there right now. They're filled with cars down there in the parking lot on the outside. So have you discussed any of this? Do you discuss with the leaseholders for major pieces like that. They've also evidently invested considerably in their buildings, there's some.
Sure, we haven't discussed specifically with Maxar themselves. We were in discussions with a representative for Alexandria until they decided to solicit offers, and they don't currently want to discuss while that process is going on. But it is something based on what their initial thoughts for the future use of this site were as the property owners. And if there's a new property owner, then that will be up for that property owner to discuss with Maxar what the future of the company is on that site. And it's, I can't really speculate what might happen. Just note that, as I said before, it's important, should there be a change in use there, that the city is prepared for that before it happens.
Just in looking at the site, there's a huge area of parking behind the buildings that are kind of not being used there. Is that part of the Alexander property, the actual parking?
Yeah, the site is about 24 and a half acres. And I should note, I've observed, presumably that a lot of the cars on that lot, they might lease it to a car dealership or other thing. I don't know that all the cars that you see on that lot are necessarily employees.
Or could be Alexander leasing some of that space to others. But, if you go there, I think you'd see during the day, it's just completely filled up. All of the areas next to San Antonio Road.
I've
access.
observed the same, but I'm not sure that they're necessarily employees.
So some of this, the planning is one thing and the real possibility is sometimes something else, just because of the ownership relationships, which is why I'm really kind of asking these kind of questions. To get off that now, I was wondering if you've included into your thinking in terms of the planning, piazzas and the future of Cubberley, et cetera, which are really, really pretty close by as a important destination for those in the community, the future community there. Charleston becomes an important connection, so the bike connection would be a part of, on Charleston as well. Is that part of your transportation planning? The bike planning in particular?
Sure. So the city recently upgraded much of Charleston Road, including past the shopping plaza where Piazzas is. We are looking to improve Charleston within the plan area, including from Fabian Way to San Antonio, and then from San Antonio to the Mountain View border. And we're also talking to our colleagues in the city of Mountain View so that we can try to create facilities that don't just stop because you hit the city boundary, and for riders as more of a seamless connection. So we are definitely looking at that.
Okay, so you're not forgetting those two piazzas, which is an important shopping center in that area.
Sure. We think, especially in the short term, it's unlikely there's going to be a grocery store. There might not ever be a grocery store in the plan area. And people will need to get to Piazzas or to Costco or to across.
Yes, Costco's
across
easy. Yeah.
Alma to get to Safeway or Trader Joe's or Target or Walmart are all located over there as well. So there's a lot of shopping, and then there's another Safeway up Middlefield further towards Midtown, right?
Yeah.
So there's all these other existing centers that we need to help get people to, and we don't want them thinking, oh, the only way I can get there is if I get in my car. We want to give them options that they can take a bus or a shuttle or ride their bike or walk to all of these things as well. So we are thinking about that.
I was wondering if your transportation planning considers the fact that since it's such a heavy truck route and car route, that what is your thinking of how to get across the street, really? Because the density of all the housing really is going to be on the east side of, I think, It's all happening actually that way of San Antonio Road. We've seen so many projects come in.
Yeah, so, I mean, we're definitely looking at how to improve each intersection. As Robert mentioned, as part of the 101 interchange, there is a proposed bike route that would connect from San Antonio
To the bridge.
to the bridge and kind of under, actually it goes like kind of up over. It's a little curly Q that like would and could connect to Transport Avenue. That's one place. We would also look at a new connection through the Maxar site, should it develop from San Antonio to Fabian Way for pedestrians and bikes. At Charleston, where there's currently that diagonal parking that's within the right-of-way between Charleston and Fabian Way, right?
Yeah.
So we are looking at alternatives that would eliminate that diagonal parking, create ped and bike facilities there, a little plaza, right? So that would shorten the distance, the crossing distance across San Antonio at Charleston. And if we create some protected features there too, we feel that we could look at that. The other thing that we will
What, just to interrupt you a second, is that
protected
stay on grade, or do you think that's?
on grade. We have explored grade separated connections. The space at Charleston and San Antonio is very constrained. And in order to get the ramping that would be necessary to get across
Down.
across and up and down is considerable.
Yeah.
You would basically need like 10,000 square feet to put in a roundabout ramp to get up and down. That's basically the size of a gas station, essentially, right? So you would need to find that space. We think, it's the feasibility of that is very complicated. So we are focusing primarily on how to improve at-grade crossings. One of the things that we will look at is at each intersection, there are currently double left turns. And so one of the things that we are looking to explore in the next phase of this is, do you need to maintain double left turns? Because if you take out one of the double lefts, you can have a refuge island and again shorten the pedestrian crossing distances. So we'll be looking at those details in the coming phases at each intersection. And then at Nita and Leghorn, also looking at how do we improve crossings and pedestrian safety there.
El Camino seems to have some kind of way of doing it, not really great yet that I can see. But somehow it's these blinking lights or some lighting treatment that would work. However, the Charleston, that is one hell of a busy intersection. I mean, I just tried to get through it yesterday and it wasn't easy, And the left turn onto Charleston going towards Mountain View was, which I got into because I wanted to go to CTI and see what, make another trip there. So a fair number of people seem to go that way as well, but you have all the counts you need on that, right, to see who goes where, whether you can end those left turn lanes. It would then mean that anybody turning left would get a turn arrow and have to be in one of the other two lanes, right? Something like that, or one of the other lanes, whichever it be. Okay, or it's a complicated, really complicated, I can see that. Don't want to take up everybody's time here on this one, but, so forget the bridge, right? So, okay, you answered the Charleston. We'll let somebody else go on here. Thanks.
Board Member Georges, you have any questions? Go ahead.
Sure, I just have a short question. By the way, Robert, Since the last time we saw this presentation, so much work has gone into this. I'm so excited to see that it's coming to life. So, thank you to both of you, and probably a huge team behind you, or in front of you.
A lot of people have put a lot of work into this.
So super exciting. I only have one small question about East Bay Shore. So I saw that alternative 3 was including residential, but then you removed alternative 3. So now the 2 remaining alternatives are just office. And I'm just curious, what was the background for restricting Bay Shore to office only?
Sure. So it's currently an office development in that area, right? We've recently added a supportive, or in the process of completing a supportive housing project in that area on San Antonio Road. But there are a lot of challenges with putting additional housing there. There are environmental concerns with sea level rise, as well as needs to mitigate, impacts for air quality from 101, which some of our other sites also have, but that are maybe a little better positioned to mitigate those. It's also disconnected from services and shops more so than the other portions of the planned area. So those were our sort of main takeaways. Chris, was there anything else?
To me, that area looks very similar to Gang Road, which was just approved in City Council. So I was kind of wondering if are there some major differences? Is the sea level different in that area, or I guess the elevation different, or is it more somehow more environmentally polluted than Gang Road, or is it less connected to services than Gang Road?
I don't know if it is less connected or more. We'd have to do the environmental analysis to know whether or not it's, there are other factors from the uses that are currently there that might impact as well. Certainly, if the direction is for us to consider townhomes similar to what are being built in Ging Road, we could explore that option. Do you have any thoughts between high-rise, mid-rise, and townhomes in that area?
I don't think so. I think, the market is for townhomes, certainly, but I think it's, I think it's up to city policy whether they want to encourage. Through state law, you might not be able to limit it. I would have to check that. I'm not up on the whole process on the 2100 Gang Road project, so.
So yeah, that was also, 2100 Ging Road was a builder's remedy process, so it was approved, but there were limitations on what the city could do in that review and approval process. I don't know if there's anything else. We have the project planner here, so.
Right, just to comment on that. So, keeping in mind it was a builder's remedy process, so the city was limited in kind of the requirements, or the applicant, if we want to frame it in another way, was entitled through state law some waivers and concessions for city standards. So if we're thinking, say, for the San Antonio area plan, the question could be if the city or the Architectural Review Board would like the city to consider different types of development. I think the market kind of has spoken a little bit for the current state that townhomes are a model. Whether we want to continue that for, say, this 20-year picture for this area, that would be something to consider. It seems that there's a potential for either higher density in some of these areas in the plan that maybe townhomes wouldn't be necessarily reaching. So just kind of keeping that maybe in mind.
do have one more comment, if that's okay for me to jump in here. I noticed that in a lot of these sort of schemas that you guys are presenting, that there's often sort of the focus on the area itself and not necessarily what's right next to it. Whereas in some of the possible presentations, it's showing, single-family homes outside the boundary of where we're fixated on, and then the thing right next to it is high density, and then putting low density actually next to the freeway. And I'm wondering why that was sort of the method in some of these ones, and I can pull up a specific sheet if we want to look at one in particular, but just sort of the concept that the transitions between the single-family homes, which are here to stay, right? There's especially these huge areas of the neighborhood off of Middlefield where it really is single-family homes. I feel like it's kind of important to consider the transitions of heights. So when we're taking into account these 60-foot versus 90-foot heights, I think that putting a 90-foot right next to a single-family home is inappropriate, right? So maybe that's where the transition comes in. And so to try and say like the CTI area, all of it's going to be 90-foot, well, that's bounded on three different, it's got, the freeway to the north, the big development to the right with the same guy, San Antonio to the left. That might make sense to say that whole area. But in sort of the north, the central San Antonio and the, I want to say North San Antonio areas, North Fabian areas and South Fabian areas, those might need to be sort of broken down a little bit more to have some transitions between them. So how much of that has sort of been considered, or is it sort of fixating in on the area itself versus what's next to it?
Sure. So we'll be creating a lot of those types of policies in the next phase.
Great.
But we have been discussing, for example, in North Fabian, for the side that abuts Adobe Creek, what kind of setbacks might be there, because you both have the creek, and then on the other side of the creek, you have single-family homes.
Right.
So if we do allow taller buildings on that side of Fabian, perhaps they're have large setbacks, perhaps they're required to step up away from the creek instead of away from the street as we more typically see. So those are definitely things that we could consider if there's an appetite for higher heights there. And I think we've also heard a lot of feedback that maybe the tallest building should be along 101 in the plan area.
Yeah, okay. So I guess that's also part of my question is, again, per Joe Jarrett's comment, is that you guys have done a tremendous amount of work. And I guess the question that I have is in terms of next steps, like how do we, as a board and as a city, process taking the South Fabian sub-area and then breaking that down farther? Is that what we're trying to accomplish today, really get into the nitty-gritty of it? Or is it more that we're a little bit high level still today, and that the next time maybe we'll have a meeting that's just focused on South Fabian versus all of them together?
So I'd say we're definitely focused at the high level still, but like with nuances between all these different areas instead of just high level for the whole plan.
Right, okay.
But Chris, if you want to talk a little bit about next phases and what's going to happen there.
Yeah, I mean, we'll take any of your direct feedback on things that we should pursue as we develop the plan. What we are trying to get to right now is a preferred plan, which is kind of the high level. Are we really going for 90, maximizing mid-rise, or do we want to have something less? Of course, you can give the direction of the nuance, and in the next phase, we'll really look at those setbacks and such. So I think that's the direction. I think, as Robert has in the slide, we're really looking for your feedback on should the plan area allow new office buildings or not. And then I think some high level direction on the transportation and mobility aspects, if you have feedback on that. I don't know that at any point we'll be coming to talk about one neighborhood directly,
Right, okay.
but we'll be back, I think the next time, providing an outline of where we are in policies and our analysis, and that more detailed, here is kind of the draft zoning that we're going with. These are the architectural concerns that the development standards will address and such.
Okay,
I
thank
have a
you.
couple of comments to sort of add a comment relative to what was discussed here about the relationship of North, what's the name of the street again? The street, you know, where Maxar site,
Yeah, North Fabian.
North Fabian. There is really a transition right now. There are some two-story buildings all along the other side of Fabian, and they continue all the way, I guess, all the way around the corner, including the school building that's right at that corner piece. So it's quite a distance to any kind of residential into that interior. Maybe a street back, it gets a little closer, but most of the street facade is broken up into completely different, similar heights actually on the other side, already in buildings that look like they're going to stay. I mean, I'm assuming there's mostly occupied. We looked at another school project recently that's also going to be rehabbing, starting to rehab this building. So it seems like there's in height transition, that discussion isn't really as relative to low-scale residential. That isn't as much of a problem for this, for the Maxar, for that what we could call the Maxar site or whatever, however we describe it.
I think it's a mix. So in addition to the Maxar site potentially developing in the future, those other sites along Fabian, we do have some project applications that are in for them. As you mentioned, we recently approved the girls' middle school rehab of an existing building that is not likely to redevelop, right? They're calling that their forever home. So we don't have any anticipation that during the life of this plan will ever be anything other than that project. But the other two-story buildings, some might stay, some might redevelop. It's too early to say for sure what those buildings will look like 20 years from now. So if they do redevelop, do we want them to stay office or do we want them to become residential? And if they're residential, do we care how tall they are? Do we care, do we want to limit them to 5 stories? Do we want to allow them to go a bit higher if that's what pencils out for them? And if they go higher, then how do we, position them so that they're in context and not in conflict with their neighbors behind them on the other side of the creek? Because they're not going to be in conflict, I don't think, with their neighbors along Fabian Way. But to the single-family homes on the other side of the creek, I think we have to be sensitive and make sure that we're not impacting those neighbors unnecessarily.
Okay, that's a partial answer. I mean, in some sense, we get hamstrung by the state regulations, because if a builder comes along and says, I'm going to work with state regulations, and you have limited say about what they decide to build, don't you?
So in some cases, yes. For example, when we were subject to the builder's remedy, that gave developers a lot more flexibility to what they could propose and limited what the city could enforce within our own standards based on their complying with state law instead of with our local ordinance. There are other incentives, state density bonus law, for example, that gives them the ability to request waivers and reductions in standards, right? In exchange for certain things like affordable housing, right? So and it's impossible to guess what the state legislature is going to do next to help incentivize housing, but they've made it clear that they are going to continue to pass laws that make it easier for people to build housing. So that is something that we have to navigate through the plan. But we also have things like HIP AHIP, where we say to developers, if you go through a city process instead of the state process, we're also going to give you some incentives, and it'll be a more collaborative approach.
Perfect.
Than a confrontational one.
Absolutely.
And I would say that the city actually has seen success when we set out a framework and guides and clear indication of what the city is looking for what we're interested in seeing in terms of development. Many of the developers who we see coming in with applications really are taking that into consideration when they do the design. It's not 100%, but these kinds of guidance documents, plans do have an effect in terms of future development being better aligned with what the city is looking for in the different areas.
And I would say since the area plan covers a significant portion of our city, and also each of the sub-area has its own uniqueness, and the staff and the consultant team also provide tremendous details and alternatives to each of the areas. So I would suggest to best use our time and ensure no area is overlooked. Maybe we can go through each of the sub-area in the order that staff presented, and we can provide comment and feedback, and if any specific alternatives we want. And we can go around the table for each of the sub-area. If you have feedback, you can share it. If you don't, you can just feel free to pass it. And then in the end, we can wrap it up and share some general comments or final thoughts after we cover the entire map. How about that? Okay, so.
Sounds good.
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
Just another quick question, because you mentioned that you would like to get feedback on the bike lanes as well. So some of the alternatives include getting like an easement from the property owners, right? Like how does that usually work? Like the city probably has to pay for those easements, or like how difficult and costly is that process?
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways that can go. If a site is redeveloping, we engage with them during that process as part of their application. And we talk about dedication and whether or not that's feasible for their project and how we can incorporate that. And we try to work with them to get that done. If a site is already developed and not likely to redevelop, for example, the greenhouse homes is not likely to redevelop, we would have to go to them and as a city and make an offer for the space that we think we need and enter in a negotiation with them to acquire that piece of property or an easement through that piece of property.
Is there like an average cost that can be?
Yeah, we're still looking into what the costs might be for that. I don't have an answer for you right now.
It seems to me that what would be more important is to know whether you can even do it. You know, you can't have a gap when you have a scheme. How do you, have you done this before in urban areas where you have a multiple ownership and you're trying to do a whole scheme of bike improvements, et cetera, like that?
I mean, each situation is unique, but if you look at, alternative to, say, that tries to do the the shared use path on the northwest side of San Antonio, if we're moving that one forward, we would need to look into the details of each property and what are the alternatives if you do not get extra space outside of the right of way. And in each case, like the possibility of doing that shared use path within the right of way, it can be done, right? There are trade-offs though. You would lose a lot of the existing trees and such. So, I think each parcel is going to be unique. I mean, this is what happens when you're redeveloping already established areas, is each scenario is unique. So that's, something that, the consultant team and the city will really need to be looking at in detail. And, there might be points where, a less desirable solution is what is needed, but the mobility improvement is still possible.
like saving a tree of some sort, something like that, that you have to just, as a bicyclist, you have to figure that you're coming to a problem that is going to be not perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, then shall we move on to the land use for each of the sub-area to the staff? It would be helpful if we can pull up the slides on the screen so that everybody can see what we are talking about. And we can start with the central San Antonio sub-area. So,
From the slides in the packet.
yeah, I'm looking at packet number 24, but slide, I'm not sure what exactly number it is.
Bear with us while we pull that up.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so this area is where most of our pipeline projects happened.
So if we go to the requested feedback slide, is this the slide?
No, I think we want to go to each of the individual area. If we have the zoomed in view. Can we go down if there is a slide for Central San Antonio?
If the clerk could pull up the packet, the slide deck that's in the packet versus the one from the presentation.
Yeah, it might be easier because we can refer to our packet pages, then he can pull up the packet pages if that works. I think that's a good way to go, because there's a lot of
It's
information on
more
the packet.
context, yeah, exactly, so there's more details there.
All right, I've pulled up the packet, and then if you just refer to like a specific packet page number, then I can go to those page numbers for you.
Okay. I think we can start at page number 24. That is the start of that sub-area, and we provided two options, alternatives for the building heights. And anyone want to comment on it? If you have any concern or questions?
Sorry, can you please repeat the page number?
24, yeah.
24, okay,
24.
sorry, there it is. It's the screen was covering it.
Well, actually, so packet page number 37, it's the report page 24. If we count the packet page, it would be 37.
Well, that's Maxar.
Yes, great, perfect.
Yeah, so for this area, we can see the blue ones are the pipeline projects.
And I did want to point out, it's noted as 824 San Antonio. It says the height is 2 stories. I believe that's actually inaccurate. I think it's 4 stories.
Right.
And then 808 and 800, I think is actually 7 stories, not 5. So do we know, can we get any sort of confirmation on that?
The second application that came in for 800 and 808, I believe, is 8 stories, but I think we were referencing an earlier application, so that should be updated to eight
Great.
stories.
Yeah, and that 824 San Antonio is 4 stories, not 2. I think that's actually kind of important since we're discussing these potential projects that are already sort of in process, right? That they're at various stages of approval, so we can reason, like, I hate to predict the future here and say, oh, we're going to plan for X, Y, or Z, but these are sort of inevitable at this point, so it's well worth planning for these specific projects.
Yes.
We'll go through and double check all of them.
And just to confirm, 824 San Antonio is 4 stories that was proposed. So
Great, thank you. I mean, since I'm already babbling away here, I may as well jump in here. So on that note, I think that it's actually really important to continue what we've got going on here, and I am going to draw on my screen because I like to do that, where this whole area in here at that blue upper node of 824, 800, 808, 788, 762, all of this area is really going to be high-density residential. I think that there's absolutely no need to defer away from that, right? We've got something good going on here. That should just extend all the way down the road. My personal opinion is retail should always be encouraged. I think that brings a lot of vitality and sort of life to this space, and it makes these high-density areas that much more livable and friendly to the neighborhood. I did also, there was a screenshot where we were talking about the bike paths. I don't know if that was related to this one or one of the other segments, but potentially taking over the parking and putting bike paths in instead. Was that this one, or was that a different area?
The diagonal parking on the north side of the street?
Yeah, and
Yes.
okay, so that's this area as well. I'm just going to put my personal preference out there, is I always think that whenever you can separate bikes from cars, that's ideal. I know that it would sacrifice some trees that would need to get replanted, but whenever you can keep, and especially knowing this is a truck route, keeping those bikes, especially with kids, separate from the cars is sort of the ideal way to go in my mind. You know, walking path, bike paths, cars, all separate. And you guys did have a very good slide for that, so thank you for that. It's more work, it's probably more expensive, but for safety of all of these kids that are now going to be living in these high, density residential up and down this corridor, I think that's a very worthwhile investment. So versus the 60-foot versus the 90-foot, again, I'm always in the context of sort of this area here that has single-family homes here and here, and the greenhouse over here, maybe that portion needs to be 60 feet, but everything along here, 90 feet, shouldn't make any issue. So in my mind, this one's a little bit more straightforward, is keeping everything on the east side of San Antonio taller, west side of San Antonio a little shorter, keep the bike path separate from the cars. That would be my 2 cents on it. That's about it.
I'll just jump in to add to that is this area right here. Sorry, I have yellow for some reason. It's hard to see. That area is also close to lower density residences. So perhaps right along Middlefield could be higher, but like this back portion, if it is separate developments, we should consider that. The other thing I want the board to remember is in the projects that we reviewed along San Antonio, trash pickup deliveries was a big concern because each individual property is being developed individually, but then, we have trash pulled out onto the front, which is in conflict with the bike separation. So I don't know the solution, but I think that's a big concern that this street development, whether bike parking is, shared with pedestrian or part of the parking, like each individual garbage pickup and deliveries and, DoorDash, everything interrupting that is a big problem. So I would want the team to figure out, at least consider what's the solution, including the deliveries and stops.
Yeah, I echoed on that. Not only the trash collection along the road, but also the garage access. It's also another cutaway from the bike lane. So to keep it safe and continuous, I think it's important to find how it works when we go down the road.
We were, discussing whether there can be a back alley for deliveries and stuff in this plan, and I know that was a concern, it's not city's properties, there is no alley, but the success of many of high-density neighborhoods, even, Cal Ave type areas, is because there's a back delivery trash pickup area, which for not just this segment, but other segments of this sub-area that needs to be a big part of how developments are planned, is where's the garbage pickup, where are deliveries? We want to maximize biking and pedestrian, and therefore that's really, really critical.
Yeah, and another benefit from keeping an alleyway or service road at the back is we can also maximize our retail potentials along the street. And also the street frontage will be more friendly and pedestrian friendly instead of having trash staging there or garage access along the road.
Are we talking about exactly the same place where we've been dealing with a number of buildings, right? So do we think therefore that because they're likely to be this kind of a conflict that is being described, we want to propose that there ought not be retail on the ground floor of the buildings like that, that it kind of requires sometimes car deliveries, or other kinds of deliveries that you need for that. It's enough to, I'm sort of saying it should be limited more to residential and less to commercial, certainly, on that side of the street, based on the fact that there is enough with the car traffic to the building, which has to be from the front, and garbage pickup, which has to be from the front. Retail doesn't seem to fit into that. It just complicates it.
That was part of some of the applicants' concern is who are walking up to these retail, right? So that's a good point of like this stretch of San Antonio, as it develops, even these 4 projects that are in various stages of approval. I think these are all approved, active planning applications. They're kind of intended as a part of a driving street with high-density residential, and even having a coffee shop there is a difficult financial planning for the developers, because who is walking up to buy coffee that makes it financially feasible? So I think I'm with you, David, on this, that perhaps this stretch should not be required to have retail on the ground floor, because there won't be enough foot traffic based on approved planning and potential future planning that would make that viable. I think it should be optional if a developer wants to put retail on the first floor. And then back to the biking and the bikes versus trucks, I wonder if for this stretch plus the rest of this whole planned area, does it make sense, I forget which one of the mobility plans it was, but to have two-way bike lane on favoring the north side, because there's more residential on that side, and kind of like, yes, you have to cross over if you're going to the Caltrain station. So having some amount of bike lane on the one side, or some other way to solve the other side, but having a two-way bike lane on the north side, that would be a much more usable bike lane.
I want to sort of second that one. It seems like the other side of the street has got that potential. It might have to work its way around some tight pieces, but the great majority of it could work on that side of the street rather than the opposite side. And it seems like what you really need a bike lane to get to is the way to cross the street and to get to the other side, where the major bike would go all the way up to the train and all the way down to the Maxar type site, and it would be more likely that you could get that commercial on the other side of the street to attract the people from the east, is it? I'm not sure which direction. Southeast, northeast, I don't know, somewhere on the east side.
Any other comments on this area?
This is a general comment. I'm going to make this for every area. But I think this if we ever remove parking from the street, to have another bike lane or, something like that, I think, those cars that park there, I mean, they need to go somewhere, and they are just going to flood the neighborhood, the single-family neighborhood, and especially if we allow, a lot of new dwelling units in high-rises or, whatnot, it's going to even generate more cars. So, like, my concern consistently in these, with these projects has been that I don't think they provide enough parking. So I think my comment would be, of course, with builders remedy projects, we don't have an opportunity. But if we are creating a new zoning code for this area, I think we should be more aggressive, or consider what is the right amount of parking realistically. And I think some of these kind of parking studies, I don't know how realistic they are. So I think because if you have a one-bedroom unit with a young family, husband and wife, I mean, they are going to have 2 cars. And I think if you look at many of the even city of Palo Alto codes, we would only require 1 parking spot. But the reality is, if you are renting a one-bedroom, you are probably going to have 2 cars, and there is going to be parking space required for guests, etc. So I think that would be just my comment is, as we develop the general zoning code, if that involves removing parking space, what is the right amount of parking that we should require from the developers. And yeah, because most of or many of the bike route suggestions involve removing parking from the street. So I think that's why it's, for me, it's important. And then the second comment is more like a question. Like, is there a way, like Kendra was saying, how it's like difficult to require developers to do to build retail spaces because there's not enough foot traffic. But I wonder, like, once the entire area is built up, probably in 10 years or 15 years, there might be enough foot traffic. So is there a way to create the zoning code in such a way that this project is approved and you don't, right now you don't need to have offer retail, but once the density of this area exceeds X metric, then you will require. So like when you build your development, just plan for a coffee shop, like right now, you don't need to because the metric is below X, but after metric X is reached, you would need to open some kind of a retail, because I feel our challenges, and this is probably a typical urban planning challenge where we are trying to build like a new development. Like, it's going to be building by building, and every single time people are going to say, oh, there is not enough foot traffic, there's not enough foot traffic, so we never require. And then in 16 years from now, there's going to be a development, and then it's going to be enough foot traffic, so we're going to require that person. But I think that's unfair, because just because you are the 16th developer, we are now requiring you to do the coffee shop. Like, nobody asked us to operate the coffee shop, so it's like we're almost like taking away property rights. So
Can I also, I want to jump in here if that's okay, because I think actually you're definitely onto something, but I guess the question would be, is there a way to incentivize it maybe instead? Say, I don't know, you can build 500 square feet extra as long as it's designated retail or something like that. Is that a way to do it versus, and what is allowed? Like per Board Member Joe Jar's commentary, like what can we do to sort of encourage that?
I'll get started, and then there may be some additional ideas. When we're looking at a project, we are looking at the design of the building. So if we expect that we want to have the capacity for a cafe or some sort of retail in the future, then the building needs to be designed to accommodate that. And there can be limits on the amount of square footage of different types of uses. We, of course, can't require that it not sit vacant, right? There's limitations on the ability to require it actually be occupied. That said, I think the idea that Board Member Rosenberg put forward of how can we make it more appealing to a developer to include those sorts of amenities, I don't know that there's much of a way to do it kind of over time. There may be some ideas on that.
I think that was my concern, is that per your comments, it's if they have to do it later, I don't really have a lot of faith that they'll come back and do it later. I'm like, how do we get them to do it now? And so I guess that's the question, is you can't, you could force it, but then we're sort of discouraging building in the first place. So how do we encourage it? How do we incentivize it?
And at this point, with an area plan, the kind of feedback we're really looking for is, what are the things you're concerned about that could be issues? So the discussion of trash pickup and deliveries, for example, is a great one, because that should be built into the urban design that we're looking for. And what are the areas where you want concentrations of certain uses or amenities or improvements for bike and pedestrian safety? Those kinds of direction then will lead us to do additional analysis. And so just taking a step back, I would say that remembering that that's kind of the feedback that we're looking for at this point. We're not going to figure it all out. We're not looking at specific developments, but getting those kinds of thoughts about where are the areas, if we were to have some retail, where would we want those concentrated, or would we want it spread out along the entire length? I'm not hearing that as a strong thing that's supported, because there are other concerns. And so giving us some of that feedback as we then continue through this iterative process to get more and more details and more specific recommendations for consideration of the alternatives.
Yeah, I'll add that it can be challenging. Some jurisdictions do require that a building have retail-ready space, but not actually have retail in it right away, but like have it be prepared for that sort of scenario. It can be challenging though, because all different kinds of retail have different requirements for their buildings. They have different requirements in terms of plumbing, in terms of HVAC. If you're going to be running a kitchen and cooking in it, you have very different requirements that if you're a clothing store. Your electricity requirements can vary drastically between different types of retail. So it makes it challenging to get a tenant in if it's not built from the beginning to meet that specific client's needs, or that client's broad category of needs. And it can be really expensive to go back in and retrofit those spaces to add those types of things. But I don't, Chris has a slide on.
Yeah, I think those are all really great points, and I think I go back to Jennifer. It's about where. I think the plan will require, in certain locations, either retail or space that can be converted to retail, and that's a tricky thing. Certainly, amenity space for an apartment building is never going to be converted to retail, right? But I'm working in other jurisdictions where we're looking at, a live-work situation is a situation where you can actually design the building. It can be a residence for a certain period of time, and when the demand is there, that residential lease is gone and it's converted to retail. So there are things that we will definitely explore as we go and come back to you. I think the important thing right now is, where do you believe that those things should be required? And if?
Just want to, what we're not mentioning is a little bit of what I think you've done up to date, as a matter of fact, is to have a smaller bike path on the right, on that side of the street, this side we're looking at right now. And there's deliveries and all kinds of things that are required for commercial on a block like that. And, and then of course, there's interruption of the travel issues that come from a building out, because it's a one-side entry building in most cases. Seems to me that if we're going to put any retail commercial, it should be in a building that's on a corner, because it's likely that you're going to have some parking on a side street and have access more easily to a corner. But perhaps this area, it's somewhere else. The other part that strikes me is we shouldn't do too many predictions on what the traffic issues are going to be in terms of how you get to cars. So, I mean, there's this requirement for additional cars, 2 cars per family. Strikes me that I only have my wife and myself, and I wouldn't want a second car. They're very costly, in terms of your income, cars and insurance, et cetera, all of what goes on. They cost a huge amount of money, and we are obviously entering a new phase of thinking on what kind of driving, what kind of capability you have. The Waymo is becoming just incredible, to see all of these cars without drivers around the city here lately. Seems to be working, and if it could be at a price that's reasonable, we may not have as many. We may not need 2 cars per every family that we have in the parking garages. We require that. So I don't think it's a great idea to project right at this point exactly what is possible 60 years from now.
If I may suggest, I think we should move on to other areas, because there's a lot of overlap in our conversations. And I suggest we look at bigger picture of, the types of neighborhoods that we want to recommend, and also related to that, the parking and the parks and bike as a overall.
Yeah, and one more comment on this area is I noticed since we will have a City School Transportation Safety Committee meeting coming up later this month, so I think for this area, it will be a good example to underlay like the pipeline projects where the garage is and where the trash staging area is, and then give them a sense of what will happen and let them make more accurate evaluation on how it will impact the bike lane, the bike safety. And our goal is to have the less pressure for the riders to go all the way along. However, if there are so many cuts out along the way, then there may be some other alternatives to think about. So I think it'd be helpful to underlay or maybe simply mark up, here are the say the garage entrance, and then use a different color to say, okay, here are the trash staging area. So maybe after that we saw, okay, maybe the majority of the length of the bike lane are already being interrupted by all these kind of activities. Yeah. Okay, so if we don't have any other comments on this area, we can move on to South Fabian.
Looks like packet page 41 is a good place to start.
Thank you.
Or do you want to flip over to one of the following ones?
Wait. I think the next one in the presentation is South Fabian.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's third. Oh yeah, packet
Are we
page
good with looking?
43.
So again, if you don't mind me jumping in here, all of this is pretty much going to stay. right? This whole area here, that's the Moldo residences, the JCC, all of that. So there's no expectation that that's going to be moving anytime soon.
Sorry to interrupt, I think the next slide would be better to
Go ahead.
represent which
Not a
one will
problem.
stay.
I believe that,
Yeah,
the next
this
slide
one
shows
here.
in
Beautiful.
pink the areas that won't change.
Okay. So yeah, so all of this, not changing. This is probably not changing because that's the forever school, right? These areas probably here, not changing. So what we're really talking about is a much smaller segment in this one. So to me, this one's kind of straightforward. I mean, encourage residential, keep it lower in height. Because again, all of this is single family home. This is the lower so right, this, just keep everything in here. I'm going to flip to yellow. All of this area should be 60 feet max. Same thing here, 60 feet max. If we can get a park in there, great. But this one's kind of limited. So that's my 2 cents on it. Keep it lower, encourage a park, call it a day.
Agreed, but also regarding the park portion here, I would look at the North Fabian as a potential, as you've already shown in the plans, as a
You're right, yeah.
possibility for a 2-acre or 1.5 acre at least park that would serve these neighborhoods as well, because I think it is within probably a half-mile walk. And so instead of putting, a tiny pocket park somewhere here, it makes more sense to create a more substantial neighborhood park in North Fabian.
That park would be at that point against the the homes that are raised up with parking underneath them there. You know, the section through that would be a little strange as a park, right?
Right.
Unless you're going to create access down from the plaza in the middle, perhaps, to something like the park down there. That's possible. No, yeah, I think it could be possible to do it, but there is a kind of a physical limitation of the buildings that are right up against that line.
Right.
So if no more comments on this area, shall we move on to the Maxar site? Packet page 50 would be a good one, since we have 4 options here to look
I
at.
think briefly we should go to packet page 46, just to orient the whole North Fabian before we go to Max, or 46 or 47. Yeah, here we were discussing earlier how, like, all of these, my pen is so skinny. Let me see how to make it one. There we go. So this is all pretty low density, or I guess not all of these here. But yeah, low density neighborhoods. So for this area, which, there's a school here, I forget what all the other uses are, but probably just as a guidance of no more than 60 feet, but like we said earlier, it's unlikely that this whole stretch would change. But I do want to kind of come back to the bicycle conversation of, keeping it on the majority of it on the north side of San Antonio, because I think you had a diagram as well of connecting along Fabian, and there's this wonderful bridge that goes over to Baylands. So making sure this plan has a solid, and I think it's already in the bike routes plan. And so just, reinforcing that as this Maxar site is developed. So now we can go to Maxar.
Okay, shall we move on to packet page 50 for the 4 options?
This is,
If I may, I'll just say that these are some concept designs that we put together. When this site does redevelop someday in the future, it'll be up to the property owner to come up with whatever site design they want to propose. This is just for us to talk about what it might look like if there's, how the parks are spaced or how residential is massed. Happy to discuss like the theory behind any of these and what you like or don't like about these. But these aren't like set in stone options like the previous slides had for alternatives.
Understand, thank you. Who want to start?
I'm on a roll, I'll keep going. Again, I really sort of liked this with some pretty notable exceptions. I think that the retail being along sort of the park would be nice. Flipping this to be the high density on this outer perimeter, low density on the inner perimeter. So again, you're going from single-family homes, lower density, higher density. I think that that's kind of a no-brainer. And then just getting more retail along that park, I think, is a nice way to go. This, once we go to the next one, you'll see that there's some sort of concepts where this actually goes off the page towards the next development, the CTI, and then that one goes off into the Mountain View. And I think that sort of cascading effect of going from this one big park to the next segment where they've got a park and to the next segment where they've got a park, that connection of nodes is going to be amazing. It's going to be a really, really nice way for people to get from point A to point B and sort of travel through the spaces in very pedestrian-friendly ways. So I think by having smaller sort of separate parks, it's not as ideal. Having this big one here is a really nice way to, as Board Member Adcock said, sort of feed into the South Fabian area as well, right? It's going to support that area as well as sort of making connection points as you go to the east. So I think this one in my mind is a sort of critical path. Additionally, if you did want to put office area up in that, upper corner, kind of like in concept B, and having that little, that little pocket park there at the north side, I think all of that's quite lovely. And so just making this area kind of flexible, whether it wants to be high density or office, but flip-flopping the high and the low and keeping the big park across the south side.
If I may jump in on that, if I go to packet page 52, as far as density, your alternate MB1 is 60 feet and MB2 is the 90 feet. And what Board Member Rosenberg was suggesting is that the site is kind of split on slightly lower heights towards Fabian and higher towards 101 San Antonio. Is that a possibility to do a hybrid zoning in this segment?
It's certainly possible. We could either require that as, a setback line, that up to that point, it's a certain height, and then beyond it, it's a different height. I've also seen jurisdictions where they've had, even though it's one parcel, they have two different zoning, and the map shows where that delineation is. That gets a little complicated when you're trying to process it, but setback lines and with step-ups is something that we could do, I think.
And can we also, as part of this zoning, say that this site is required in the next development to have at least an 1.5 acre park? And, recommend towards the west end or, southwest end for better usability of the entire neighborhood?
We can look into what methods we might be able to incorporate. There are requirements for amounts of park be dedicated per residential unit, for example.
Right.
And so there are some things that can be used as tools, but that's something that we can look into more in the next phase.
Yeah, the open space per unit kind of thing, but which oftentimes tends to be internal focused, right? It's balconies plus like a little park setting for the development, but what we're trying to encourage here is almost allocating a certain part of your property for the neighborhood, not just your property's residents. So if there's a way to require that, not just encourage that, that would be really great, because this is a very, area with no parks, which is really important for the residents.
Understood. Yeah, we will take that as a suggestion.
I'm going to second that one. And I'm almost thinking that the next way, well, if you look at the Mountain View concept there, they've really put that housing project in sort of in a park. They've spent a good bit of time saying that the area outside should be really extensive, for the relative size of the buildings. Seems to me that this is a potential destination park, and that there should be significant housing. Sort of makes me think of New York and Fifth Avenue and, the taller buildings pushed up against San Antonio Way on that side, and very green towards the street, with the possibility of a significant park. And it is, one access, by the way, at the end, not quite sure what that street name is that's part of that, but it leads into that residential community, and it needs a park, I think. It's missing in this community. So a combination, and don't have too much car traffic through it. That's going to be the tough part, is getting in and out of that. You can't really get it in and out from the San Antonio side. You'd have to find access from the other side of it. But in and directly to the high rise, and then the rest of it, mostly green, is a good possibility here as a destination park.
So how do people feel about adding office area in this whole area? Is it a good spot to add some offices? Or?
I mean, I would say yes. Do you mind going back to the packet page 50? It's like 2 slides up or 1 slide up. There we go. This was the only concept that had a sort of office area. And part of it is I think that because this whole area in here was offices, one of them's been converted to a school. I believe the remainder are still offices. So the question is, are we oversaturating this area with offices? I kind of like the concept of having just the capacity for it if it feels necessary. It's a good spot for it if they want to build it, but I wouldn't necessarily force them to build it.
Yeah.
Also for the office or the taller building along the highway would be a good sound blocker for the residentials.
Yeah, I second that. I think this can totally be a mixed use, not just retail, but business use, because part of encouraging people to bike and walk is also be able to work in the same neighborhood, right? So I think it's really important that while we favor housing, we don't lose sight of where are those people going to work.
And just wanting to point out too that Fabian Way is a truck route, and that connects to Oregon Expressway. So if you're going north on the West Bay Shore, and that connection there, so.
But if you go and look at the usage, you look at the traffic usage, I think you'd find it's very, very low. It is a connection. It's kind of an interesting connection because you really don't have any interruptions all the way along, but all the way between here and Oregon, true. But it's a lightly trafficked, very lightly trafficked.
Yeah, it's pretty quiet street, and then with the exception of school hours coming and going, I mean, that street is largely empty, so.
Yeah, I think the concern we have with that street right now is that because it is empty so often, people pick up speed on it if they are traveling it. Mm-hmm. So that is something the Office of Transportation is currently looking at.
Speed bumps.
To have traffic calming and also additional pedestrian crossings and better bike facilities along that road. It's a project they were already working on before this area plan started. So we'll be working with them to make sure that coordinates with the area plan as well.
Those crosswalk speed humps are great. Whenever you've got those where it's like coming out of a school, but there's actually the hump up and the crosswalks on that high part, man, people really seem to slow down for those quite nicely, so.
Speed table is that term.
Thank you. I'm like, I don't know, it's a speed crosswalk. It's a speed bump crosswalk, yes, speed table. Those are excellent, and especially knowing that the school is going to be there. And I think that this is, considering that school is going to be there, that they're not going to be going anywhere anytime soon. This is also worth keeping in mind that some of the people may move to this area specifically to be close to that school. So yes, slowing down traffic on that road, definitely worth a conversation.
Yeah, there's also an existing school there that uses the JCC for their physical education activities. So there, during the school day, students are crossing back and forth across Fabian Way. So that's something else that that prompted the concern to do more on that street.
So I think this is a very good site because it has one owner who is potentially trying to sell, and you said they are waiting for the conclusion of this process, and And I really like this site because this is very close to the highway. And like whatever we build here, the impact on the rest of Palo Alto will be minimized. Like this is the one site in Palo Alto. Like whatever you build, the impact is going to be much less than anywhere else. So I would say, I would say to not to. I would probably not like over plan it with different concepts, for the developer. But I would just say this is a large lot. And then figure out, the layout, but, give them maybe some kind of like a minimum square footage that they need to build. And I'm definitely in favor of like a mix of office and residential. I would not, I don't have a strong preference. Like some people have a strong preference, like where the office should be versus residential. Like I personally don't have that. I think the developer can figure that out. But I think if we could go to them and say, we want this amount of park space and we want this amount of square footage, I think they can figure it out. And, they come up with their own concepts. And I would go for max it out as much as you can. So you have even set a minimum, because I think this lot could be wasted. So that would be a hard take if this gets wasted. Let's say they put like townhomes. I think that's a waste for this property. I mean, this is the one area in Palo Alto where we can put a lot of residential units. This is where we can put large offices. Let's not waste it. So I would say, there has to be a minimum, for me, and the maximum. But I mean, the minimum for me is more important. You have to do. You are probably better figuring like how to split the square footage. But for me, it's not necessarily 60 units per acre, because if you do more office, it can be less. Let's say if you do a high rise, and half of it is the first 5 or 6 floors are office, and then the top floors are penthouses. It might only be 30 units per acre. But you have a lot of office square footage. So I think we have to look at the combination. And I think the developer can, look at it, how to do it, luxury condominiums versus offices versus, fitness center versus, they might actually have like a supermarket if it's a really large, housing. But I think for me, the main point is try to max it out. I'm personally not worried about the high building height, because we have the strip of land between the single-family area and this site, which is the I don't know how you call it, that little strip. Does it have a name? I compare.
Yeah, north.
Sorry, are you talking about Adobe Creek, or are you talking about the built-out offices on the west side of Union?
Yeah, build-out offices. Okay. So I think there's probably some other like rules. I think that's where I would put the lower height to bridge to the single family. So maybe 60-foot height limit or even lower. But I think when you get to the Maxar site proper, I would say, go big.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that to Jennifer or Robert? Is minimum density a thing that you require on a site, or can you? I thought it was just maximum.
So no, we don't do it very much, I think, in Palo Alto, but there are jurisdictions that require minimum densities. That is also something that the regional government has asked us to look into implementing around our transit stations. It's something the city of San Jose has done in many of their projects as well. So it is something in the planning world where you can have that in the code.
And then if you're thinking about, say, state density bonus law, there are requirements to kind of meet a minimum density and kind of have that framework of between what a maximum could be with the kind of incentives of building out that density on the site if you're meeting the certain standards or using the requested waivers and concessions. So that's kind of where minimum density would come into play, so.
There's actually a minimum density currently on the Maxar site of 40 dwelling units per acre. So at 40 dwelling units per acre, a project theoretically could come in with like 200 to 300 townhomes and then 400 to 600 like apartment, right? Because it can range. So that's why the alternatives provided like the status quo, which is the minimum 40 dwelling units per acre, or should the city increase the minimum dwelling units per acre to ensure that there's not like a third of the area at townhomes?
Yes, I would definitely increase. And in addition, put in maybe minimum density for non-residential, not density, like how you call it, like a minimum square foot per acre for non-residential.
Can somebody tell me what the focus area density is?
That has the minimum density of 40 dwelling units per acre. Correct.
Is that correct?
You're referring to the El Camino Real focus area?
Fish market site.
Oh, then I thought you meant this area,
No.
which is also a focus area, is
No,
it not?
no, I'm not talking, no. I'm talking about the fish market site, I think it's 3150 El Camino, is that the number?
Right, the Fry development or Sobrado.
Not Sobrado, no.
Where the McDonald's and the fish market were, but yeah, I don't know. It's not the
We'll
focus
look-
site.
We'll look that up.
Acclaim and Stanford together now, and it's been, we've,
Yes,
So if I can play devil's advocate here for 1 minute in terms of increasing the minimum density, my one concern would be is that if we raise that up, we're going to discourage the capacity for a larger park, right? Because this site as a whole, we want it to dedicate this big chunk of space, preferably to a park, right? This 1.5 minimum, 3 acre preferred, right? And so if we increase the density, that 3 acres coming out and being dedicated towards a park, we should at least, I mean, maybe there's a way to write this where you say, okay, anything that's designated as a park doesn't count, right? And so your density is really based on what's left, because we don't want them to get penalized for having a larger park that now all of a sudden their calcs don't calc. So I'd say if we can write something like that in, I'm all for raising the density. But again, keeping in mind that we do have townhomes to the north here on Fabian. We've got single-family homes here. So I love the transitioning between spaces versus just going all high density all the way. And then just making sure that the developer is not penalized for dedicating more land to a park. Then I'm good to go.
I'll just add that typically when a site dedicates to the city property, then that reduces their acreage, so therefore that's not counted towards their density, right? So if it
Correct.
actually becomes a city park, that
Right.
removes that issue. If it's a privately owned, publicly accessible park,
Right.
then we might have to have some kind of
Exactly.
stated explicit that we're not looking at that for the density calculations.
Exactly, and that's sort of where, and again, maybe my terminology might have been a little misleading here, is that I'm not necessarily assuming that the person would want to dedicate 3 acres of land, just give it over to the city. They may want to maintain that as their own private park that is publicly accessible. And if they allow that park to be publicly accessible, we should make sure that they are able to do so in a way that they're not penalized for having density issues down the road. But I think we should be allowed to give them the freedom that they can keep the park as part, like they may not need to dedicate the land, right? They should have that flexibility, but just, encouraging that space is there and publicly accessible for sure.
Yeah, I think we need to find a balance here instead of just pursuing the high density, because remember the Fabian Way is a relatively narrow street, 1 lane on each direction, and with the left turn lane in the middle. So with high density, maybe the infrastructure is just not ready there yet. Shall we move on to the next one, the CTI? We can start with packet page 56.
I wanted to see, the next way we ought to be seeing these kind of projects, I think, is really some 3D drawings. You know, it's a problem sometimes to look at site plans that are so kind of tightly, just one color on the whole thing, you know. To explore the actual way in which this would look ultimately, who knows, maybe along all of the access road as well as San Antonio Way was a series of tower elements that are next to each other and separated 60 feet apart, but one after another up to a significant height, kind of making the turn around that whole edge, and everything else is open space. I mean, I feel uncomfortable in just making too many broad statements without exploring the design possibilities here as to what they might look like. And I think in terms of acceptance of the public, it's important to kind of show these in 3D.
So just to play like, you know, the opposite side of that, because this is a citywide, like almost like a framework effort on property that the city doesn't own. So for the city to do master planning of a property for heights and what the site might look like seems like beyond what the city should be doing. I mean, obviously incentivizing density and all of that is within, you know, city's jurisdiction to both require and encourage and incentivize, but saying you will build a 12-story tower here and a 6-story tower here, even the site plans that we were looking at for the 4 options, it is a very rough idea with, like, I assume not a buy-in on those 4 options from the owner, I don't know. But that's, you know, just an idea to say you could have internal streets and a park. But beyond that, it's not for the, I could be wrong, but that doesn't seem like it's for the city to dictate in any way.
Correct, and we want to be careful about implying that the full area is going to get redeveloped to the full capacity, right? You can, with modeling to kind of full build out, can actually imply something that's beyond, you know, what actually will occur. And so being cautious as we're looking at projections of number of units, for example, but also physical illustrations of build out. We do intend to have some, you know, additional detail as we narrow down these alternatives. And so it's a balance between how much detail we can get into at each stage of this process. But we take your comment and suggestion, helping people understand what some of this will look like is always a good idea.
Yeah, the project, what is it called again? The one in Mountain View on the other side of CTI?
The one showing on the screen here is what you're talking about? With the multicolors, the pink and purple?
The one showing on this screen?
Yeah.
So that is, yes, that is in Mountain View.
Okay, yes, that one. So, you know, they of course show some three-dimensional, because they're further along. It's a whole project already.
Correct. There's already an application submitted to the city of Mountain View.
So on the Maxar site, one additional question, sorry, I know we were going to jump into this. Just in terms of the density, like we want to encourage at least a minimum density, and then we were talking about, you know, requiring at least 1.5 acres of park. Can the city also require at least 2 ways in and out of that development, because the traffic density with 1,000 potential units is going to be quite large? And also Fabian Way, I believe, yeah, it is one lane each way, if I remember correctly. What that impact would be if there are 1,000 units there. Is that already being studied?
Yes, and I mean, the the Palo Alto Objective Design Standards requires small blocks and such. So the city already has certain regulations on how a large site needs to redevelop, and further down the line in the specific plan, we'll get, or not specific plan, area plan, we'll get more detailed in those type of requirements.
And of course, any development of the site would be evaluated, and, you know, appropriate, say, transportation analysis or an impact analysis of the proposed development on the site would evaluate those things.
All right, looking at the CTI, do you mind going two screens down? I think it's packet page 59, just because it cleans it up a little bit. Thank you. So with what we were talking about before, if we do manage to get that big, beautiful park right here, right, on that other segment, there's and then let's say this is a little park, and then they've got the Mountain View Park, and maybe this is a bigger park, kind of like following this train of thought, having a connection path, right? This creates a set of these nodes that we're talking about where you have all of this potential for connectivity between these spaces that I think would be really profoundly useful for all the pedestrians in the area. So that's one of the reasons why I like this concept of this park being in this area, because A, it services this whole South Fabian area, it services everything north of it, it connects it across over into this node. So that being said, I'm sort of you know, I know that we have to sort of focus on piece by piece because at some point it gets too overwhelming if it's bigger, but understanding how some of these potential connections could play in, I think is sort of also vitally important here too. Very fond of this area and knowing that this is a connectivity possibility because of the same developers or the same owner?
They're owners and developers.
Okay, perfect. So just knowing that they're on board with connecting these two spaces and crossing city boundaries, because we often run into conflicts with that, where we have a hard line. This is Palo Alto, this is Mountain View, and there is no connectivity, and the cities really have a harder time working together. So knowing that we've got a bridge here, I think is going to be awesome. It's going to be a really, really nice way to sort of connect these two portions of the cities. So on that note, here my biggest focus is really on connecting these nodes. I'm going to leave it to the other board members to talk about how else they want to fill it in. But that, for me personally, I think that's sort of a vitally important segment of this property, and then being able to connect it back across San Antonio, right? It's that connectivity, because otherwise San Antonio remains a sort of barrier. And being able to go from point A to point B and get through those barriers is where the pedestrian-friendly, bike-friendly, school-friendly process really happens. And this is the node in my mind, this is the area in my mind where those nodes really come alive in that capacity.
Is that a possibility, given the grade and everything at San Antonio by 101?
So in the short term, it would be difficult, but in the future, as VTA is doing the 101 San Antonio interchange project, they are looking to improve the bike ped access across 101 there as well. So you don't have to go up to the bridge that the city built that's further north on 101. You can cross there. You have options. And as part of that, we think we can tie in to allow people to go across where you're not crossing either San Antonio or the on-ramps themselves and get from one side to the other. So that's the one thing that we're exploring for like grade separated crossing of San Antonio. You know, as we mentioned, the other option would be to build another footbridge, and we don't have the real estate. We'd have to acquire new real estate on the south side of San Antonio to make that work. So that's a lot less likely to advance, but there are options to get people from one side to the other, not at grade. And in the meantime, we're also exploring ways to make that at grade crossing safer and more comfortable for people as well.
Yeah, I drew on here kind of where the planned crossing is, right? It kind of follows up, it goes over and then to North Bayshore, and then it would come across. And that's what's currently planned in the interchange.
I think it's on packet page 104 if you want to.
Yeah, I think.
And while we're scrolling to that, just want to jump in with a bit of a time check. It is 11 o'clock. And so just checking in as we're moving through to make sure we get all the input you'd like to share today.
Okay, thank you for the reminder.
In theory, I think we're sort of getting to the end of this, correct?
Right, yeah, and, yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, while we have this on the screen, the red would require a 9% ramp. Is that what you're saying is kind of almost infeasible? Is that correct?
Yes, earlier I said having a grade-separated crossing at Charleston is extremely difficult because there's not the real estate. You would have, and in the upper right, you kind of see an example of ramps can't be 9%, they need to be 5%.
Right.
And so that's saying it would be infeasible physically in that location. And so, and even doing a spiral ramp requires on each side a 100 by 100 foot area, which is essentially about the size of those gas stations. So you can see the real estate needed for a grade separated crossing at Charleston is difficult. And then we were pointing out the green lines that are to the right are what are proposed as part of the 101 interchange. And I believe what Member Rosenberg was suggesting was trying to create another either at grade or grade separated crossing in a different location.
So exactly. So understanding that at this point, if they wanted to cross over, they'd have to go all the way through here and then all the way back down to cross the street. Is that accurate? Or they'd have to go all the way down here and then come all the way back? Ew.
I think based on the speed and the slope of that section, that's why I wanted to bring this up.
Yeah, it's a great point, but I'm like, oh man, we really need something there. But I see the conflict. Tunnel, I mean, tunnels are always creepy, but it's yeah, I see the concerns here, but man, that would be such a good thing because like I was saying, this is a barrier. It's a huge impediment to being able to connect these areas. And I think if we can find a way to get a little bit closer of a connection there, and that would be so well worth it. But again, I understand that finances are a real thing, so.
I'll also add that we used to have a tunnel under 101 before we built the pedestrian bike bridge, and it was closed for part of the year because of flooding.
So shall we move on to packet page 61 to talk a little bit about the size of the open space and also the potential location, whether it's along the Charleston or more towards the inner of the CTI? Any preference on that feedback?
I'll jump in. I think, obviously our opinions are based on places we're familiar with, right? And because this, and Charleston as it is now, obviously it's going to change over time. It feels like for these even high-density neighborhoods to feel like home and have a neighborhood park, I'm kind of inclined towards the ones that are not on Charleston, but further inboard. But also, either one of those. But as Board Member Rosenberg was saying earlier, like there's so many neighborhoods like up in Sonoma and all, where there's a park and a strip of retail next to it that becomes like, even if it's a small restaurant that can use outdoor seating in the park, or people can buy food and go sit at a picnic at the park. Those are ways that life in a high-density neighborhood feels very open and nice. And so I'm kind of inclined towards those those two options, and even this one that encourages a larger park with potential retail that can then connect with the other side of Mountain View. So it becomes two neighborhoods with park and retail that serves both and further beyond.
Yeah, and from my understanding, this center area and that other development is designated to be a park or a green space, correct? Right in the middle of that, is that accurate?
I believe it's a plaza.
Okay, so some type of open community space. Yeah, and so that connection, I'm with Board Member Adcock here, that this is a really nice connectivity route.
Any other comments on this subject? Or we could also move on to packet page 68 for the land alternatives. They have 4 options. 2 are more residentials, and the other 2 include offices. So how do we think about the height of in this area, and also whether it is good to include some offices in this space?
I think knowing that this is sort of its own island to some extent and connecting over to Mountain View, this is definitely an area that in my mind can be built up bigger, higher, denser, right? It's sort of its own little island to some extent, and you can really have a lot more freedom with this space. So again, I'm just throwing this out there as my own opinion. I think going higher in this area is totally fine, especially along the 101. More mixed use, I think, would be, again, revitalizing to this area, because right now it's predominantly industrial, from my understanding, low-grade and industrial items. And so just really putting a lot in there could be really beneficial, so.
I just want to point out that this area could also not just have retail, but office space. So like truly mixed use, residential office retail.
Sorry to interrupt. Can we move on to the next page, which shows the potential offices areas, the purple ones? Will that be too much, or?
That is a lot of purple.
Yeah.
Well,
Maybe we
but-
are looking for something in between.
Just to kind of confirm, these are potential, distributions, but given that many of the properties are separately owned, is the feedback that is being requested about like which, that strip should be office versus the other, or just overall in this development percentages of use?
So I think right now, what would be most helpful would be limits across the whole area. I know that as developers come in, they'll have their own ideas about how things should be located adjacent to each other. These diagrams are for purposes of discussion, not finalization. I mean, if you do feel strongly that office should only be on 101, that's great feedback. If you feel like you're not as concerned about the location, just the amount, that's also great feedback.
May I check where is the boundary of the school district divided to 2 cities? Is it this line here, or
It's the next slide, I believe.
this one in the middle?
If we go to the next slide, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So for me, this is another amazing area for high rise and density. I agree with what has been said, and the challenge is of course the ownership structure, and I think like my feedback would be like I believe there has to be like an entrepreneur who is going to come in and have a vision and talk to the different owners and maybe buy them out or kind of organize it as a developer. Like it has to be like I think this area can only become a thriving community if we find an entrepreneur, developer who can do it. And I think the only way we can find that if there are enough incentives. So I think if you put too many constraints on the zoning in this area, this area will not be identified by by those firms. So that would be my feedback, is to be probably go for your alternative 4, that would offer the most opportunities for a developer, because this is going to be very costly, for them to create a community, because they have to buy everybody out, and as you said, a lot of people are unwilling to sell, so they're only going to sell if the price is very high, and I think that's just a reality. Unfortunately, for us, like to make this, if we want this area to move from being an industrial area to a thriving community with offices and housing, it will require a lot of investment, and for somebody to put up that investment, he needs to be able to make, to recoup it. So that would be just my feedback. If we say, oh, offices only in this corner, housing only this corner, this many parks and, height limitations, it's just I think it's going to be too restrictive. It's nothing is going to happen. Like, I think if we just go with alternative one, it's a great alternative. I'm not saying it's a bad alternative, but it's just not going to happen. Because nobody, will be able to pull it off. I think if you say alternative 4, it might be big and lucrative enough for somebody to try to pull it off. So I think you give yourself a chance for moving from an industrial area to an office building. I think, so that would be my feedback. And I'm not afraid of the height limit, because it's on 101, it's partly in Mountain View. There's this large development that's happening in Mountain View, so I think this is an ideal location for a large development. And in terms of the crossings and everything we have spoken about, I think, there will need to be transportation upgrades and things like that. But I think if the upside is big enough, those will be easier to pull off. Like right now, you cannot find a location for a pedestrian, a pedestrian bridge, because there are a bunch of small parcels. And so you cannot convince any of the small parcel owners to do it. But if somebody rolls up the whole area, they might be able to do it. So I think that transportation improvements will come if there is, a big enough project for somebody to do.
Could you pull up that slide that, sorry to interrupt, that showed the Mountain View developments like heights? I remember there was a slide about it. Sorry, Dave. I just wanted this for a reminder for ourselves that the development next door is the highest is 11-story and 8-story for residential, right? So just thinking about like what the next neighborhood development might be, just for context, I think we should consider this.
And just a reminder, this is what has been proposed and submitted, not yet approved by the city of Mountain View. So there could still be changes to this project in some ways.
I think the only comments I would have is, again, sort of making concessions for a connector point at that point, and if there's a connection over here or something like that, right? Just making sure that we've got those sort of in mind as well.
And to think about the whole CTI area, are we thinking about maybe like 8-story, 7-story is appropriate, or maybe taller ones as option, alternative 4, proposed maybe high-rise is also appropriate in this area? Any comments?
I have to admit, I don't, Palo Alto's not a high-rise city, so I do have a hard time crossing that boundary into saying, yeah, we should go high-rise. So I'm like, 90 feet seems to be appropriate through all of Palo Alto now. Huh? This is, yeah, I know, this building's a little different, but we really just don't have a lot of high-rise here, and is this the area we'd want to start it, and then does we want this to be like the only high-rise segment in the entire city would be my only question there. If you were going to have it, along the freeway is always a good place to go, but in my mind, I'm just not super inclined to go to that tipping point of going above 90 feet, but I'm definitely open if you guys have different commentary.
I think the 11-story office in this next door Mountain View neighborhood is probably in the 135 height limit range, right?
It's actually above, it's 170 feet.
Okay.
Valid point, that might make me change my mind.
That would be a 16 to 17-story residential building at that height.
So yeah, I think in that context, if that project moves forward, and because we're hemmed between 101 and San Antonio at the top end where it's,
Yeah,
going
totally
to-
valid.
at the highway speeds almost, it makes sense to be, in context, allow up to that height. I wouldn't say required to be that tall, but allowed to be that tall seems reasonable.
Right, I will echo on that, and since this is also like the highway access from the 101, it could also be like a gateway to Palo Alto. It's like, you see the high rise, you arrive Palo Alto.
And if I may, just to point out, certain height limits does change the construction technique. So having a limitation of a height may preclude certain types of construction, so.
Thank you. Any additional comments on this area, CTI, or?
Just because it's multiple ownership, the blue lines, is that the ownership boundaries that we're seeing here? I forget what the legend
Housing
said.
element, right?
The blue lines represent the housing element sites. We haven't specifically mapped out ownership on these slides.
That's okay. So, yeah, I was just, like, as far as like what we say as, what we recommend as types of development, because it's multiple ownership, and it's hard to say that, this should be 40% retail and, 60% residential, however it gets broken out, because every ownership is going to want to do their own thing. I think a big shark coming to eat up all the fish, I don't think it's something that we either want to like make it so that that's the only possibility, right? Because it is, it's multiple ownerships and they will develop as they wish, and we just need to encourage more housing development. So I would want to, my recommendation would be to, with that, I think the alternate 4, high-rise possibilities, and I don't know if that would require that a minimum square footage of lot size, because we also don't want to, quarter-acre lot being 60 feet or 60 stories or whatever, that, 17 stories tall. So minimum square foot, like lot size for the various heights. I don't know if that's something that fine grain you would want to go in this planning level, but this particular area, as I was reading through the packet, kind of was starting to think about like what is the metrics that the city would want to put out there as the development guidelines for this area because of the multiple ownership.
I think that's something we could do. We could say that in order to have office, you have to be on a lot of a certain size, and otherwise you have to have residential and ground floor retail only. We could say that if you're over a certain size, these are the requirements, and if you're under it, you have different requirements. Those are things we could do as we're developing the policies of the plan that I think are reasonable to, and also if we do them correctly, they will encourage people to consolidate their lots so that they have more options to develop as well.
Yeah, on that note, is there a way that we can streamline that process as well, as like specifically in this area, if you own these 3 lots and you want to combine them into one, we as the city are going to help you get through that process faster, cheaper, easier, right? So that if they do have 4 separate lots, they can combine them into one with a little bit more ease. Is that something we would want to encourage, first of all, and then is there a way to actually do that on that tail end?
I would say that the lot merger process actually isn't too complex
Okay.
at this stage. And so it's more about, saying that they could develop more if they have a lot that is larger, right? We did some of that in the rules for the El Camino Real focus area, where you got more lot coverage, for example, if you had a lot of a larger size.
Well, yeah, now
And
the
so
setbacks
doing
go out the
things like
window.
Right. And so doing things like that encourage the consolidation of multiple lots in terms of what they can develop, rather than, say, a change in the process. In terms of the lot merger, I think that's the lesser part of the
Okay,
process.
fair enough. Thank you.
So how do you deal with the, what we were talking about, the connectivity and the interior road that connects to the neighboring? How can you handle that piece if it's going to be open space, some of it? How would that work?
Let us know what kinds of connections you think are important to build into this, and then we'll look into what the methods are for implementing that.
And it's, if someone has a 5,000 square foot lot and they want to redevelop it, it's not realistic for us to put a lot of burden on them to create outdoor space or connections through that one particular lot. But if someone is doing a project of a larger size, and maybe we have that as a threshold, the projects over a certain size have to include connectivity across these blocks, or have to have a certain amount of park space that can't just be feed out. It either has to be dedicated or a publicly accessible, privately owned space. So those are things that we can work through at the policy portion that we go into next. But, the things that you want us to include in those policies is really important for us to hear now.
So we started with the connectivity, right? And we like what we saw, and part of that for the connectivity to an internal park, actually internal and external. I guess it came out to East Charleston, or did it? But anyhow, without the connectivity to that connection.
I'm sorry, is there a question or?
No, it was really just, I think we were all kind of in favor.
Commenting support for it, yeah.
Great, thank you.
All right, so we can move on to secondary opportunity areas. If we have any additional comments, I know Board Member Georgia commented something about the Bay Area. Is there any additional comments on Alma or West Bay Shore, East Bay Shore?
Yeah, that was a question. I didn't particularly comment on it, but I think it would be nice to see the possibility of residential development on the other side of the freeway. Like, I don't see a reason why to say no. So I think if a developer comes and would like to convert the office space into some kind of a development, I think that would be great. Again, I don't see a big reason for restricting that. And the only addition I would say is just because of the learnings from Gang Road. Like, if somebody, like a shark comes and eats up all the little fish and wants to create hundreds of townhomes that all looked alike, and people are going to live like sardines. I think we want to avoid that. So I think somehow it would be nice to see a more diverse, more diverse community. So again, I think you are looking for feedback. So I don't know how to do it, but Like, I don't think we want that whole area to be just townhomes of the same sort. No, we would like more diversity. Maybe we would like to have apartments. Maybe we would like to have, some services, maybe some rental, some ownership. Like, I think we would like to have a more diverse community, because it's also on the other side of 101, so it's a community for itself. So it's not like, if there's a big townhome development on El Camino, like, I think it's okay because right next to El Camino is going to be an apartment home. So like overall the community is diverse. But like in Gang Road, the problem was that they took over the whole area and it's only townhomes. So it's not a diverse. I think it would be nice to, have some diversity.
I want to second that, and third that, and fourth that.
And can we pull up packet page 78 on the screen, just so that the public can see which area we're talking about? Thank you.
What packet page?
It's 78, it's on the screen. So the question on this, though, while I support more housing, I wonder, like, in this particular area, it is truly an island. So one end of the spectrum is some portion of this becomes housing and the rest is office, right? And so those residents would be living in a even smaller island with no connectivity without the highway, crossing the highway. Whereas, other part of me is also worried about losing commercial real estate as we encourage, of course we need to encourage housing, but for a city to be vibrant, tax income, all of those things, there needs to be a certain amount of commercial real estate as well. And so I'm more inclined to say allow a higher density of commercial in this area because it is part of a vehicular-only connected part of town, other than, of course, there's the connection to Baylands. But it does feel like kind of like Gang Road, a very island place to live. So it's either this entire site is enough of a residential development that it's not a few townhouses and then the rest of offices. So for this to be a viable living community, it either needs to have a certain amount of residential for community to be built, or it's commercial. So I'm kind of torn on which way I would recommend this particular site, because if I remember correctly, beyond San Antonio on the other side is also all commercial. There's not much in the way of residential on this side of 101 in this particular area. So I'm open for thoughts on that.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to isolate the people in this little island here. It almost would be like if that was an office park, everyone that lives on this side would bike across 101 and then I'll go to work there. Or a hotel where people, if they're going to get from point A to point D, they often take a cab or an Uber or a Waymo or whatever. Again, this one I'm just a little bit, I just haven't really put a lot of thought into it, and I think I'd be more inclined to say my concern would be that this would be an island of residences, and we wouldn't want to isolate those people. But there are a lot of creative developers out there who can make something pretty magical happen, so open to possibilities. And also just on this note, if you go down one slide, West Bay Shore, I think is kind of a no-brainer. That should be, housing right along there, great. If it wants retail, great. If it wants offices, great. But just it's really connected to everything else being on this side of the freeway. So that one just really, I think, should get absorbed into all the discussions that we're having today. It's a great spot for more development.
And just for context, this West Bay Shore parcel, as well as the parcels across the 101 are still zoned that ROLME or ROLM, which is a research office and limited manufacturing. So our current zoning standards do allow for residential uses to be there, similar to how that development was at King Road, but it is requiring a conditional use permit for exclusively residential uses. So
I'm not sure if that's true. This is a housing element site, so I don't know if they need a CUP for this particular site.
for the West Bay Shore one, no.
Yeah, for just this one site.
Yeah, exactly. So this one, I think, just bring it on over.
Yeah, I'm just looking at Google Maps on East Bay Shore side, which, like, there would be no connectivity to retail and no walkability other than Balin's from that side, if that's residential.
If no more comments on this area, we can move on to the Alma. And if any thoughts about SB 79 in this area, if we can go to one slide down.
So I'll just, if I can add for context, the city is still deciding how to approach SB 79. The state law allows for a couple of different options. We can either just implement it as it is written, or we can designate certain sites as being exempt under certain conditions, and that exemption would be good until 2032, or we can adopt an alternative plan that gets reviewed by the state and approved, that rearranges where the density goes, but we can't reduce the overall density that the state law would currently allow. We are currently meeting with an ad hoc of the city council to discuss those options, and are currently scheduled to go to the full council on May 4th, the first Monday in May, to get their feedback about which direction staff should pursue as far as that goes. Having said that, our staff level analysis and our consultants' analysis as well have shown that there's not likely to be a lot of redevelopment at this particular station, which is different from the Cal Ave and downtown stations, because so much of, first of all, only 25% of the area that is allowed to develop under SB 79 is actually in Palo Alto. The rest of it is in Mountain View. But the portions within Palo Alto are largely built out already. There are a lot of single-family homes that are high value and are less likely to be bought, torn down, and replaced with higher density products. There is a partial exception. We do have two religious institutions on Alma that are within the radius, that are part of our plan area. Those they already can redevelop before SB 79. There's a state law that allows for surplus land and religious institutions to develop housing. So that's why we included them in the plan to begin with. They could develop also under SB 79 alternatively. But the other areas that are within the radius that are eligible for redevelopment are less likely, just because of the current use and value of the land for that current use, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. And I think we covered all the sub-areas, and if there is any additional thoughts about the mobility alternatives or any certain slides you want to go over? Well, I think we can take a quick look at the packet page 107. If anyone has, there are 3 alternatives compared to the existing. If anyone want to comment on.
I think we discussed this a tiny bit earlier when we were talking about the first area. Generally, separated bike lanes are safer and perceived to be safer as well. So definitely prefer the more separated options, but of course, with the reality of what San Antonio, the approved developments are doing, and how, there's stretches of bike lane that separated would be great, but then what happens at intersections, and going towards Caltrain. So, and then I do have concerns about the easement issues as well. Because obviously the easiest way is to not have to worry about easements, but that does limit to, I believe, only alternate one. Is that right? And then the separated bike lane options requires easements. Am I following that correctly?
Generally, yes. Yeah. Alternative one is working solely within the right-of-way. There is an opportunity to get an access easement, widen the sidewalks on either. And alternative two would certainly require working with landowners on the north side to expand that path. Alternative three, again, it could have a narrower sidewalk and work within the right-of-way, but does require considerable movement of infrastructure, curbs, and street trees.
Yeah, my personal preference is alternate, which one is this, two on the bottom left, if the left side is the north side. Generally with like, but having, I guess I should preface that with, that's my preference for the bike portion, but generally, like especially people commuting on bikes, sharing the road with pedestrians is really hard. And so that's my concern with that. I would love to have two-way bike lane on one side, but not shared with pedestrians. But shared lanes are great in parks and such, but as a commuter trying to get to the train station and you're sharing that pathway with pedestrians is really difficult. So, so I'm not, so I guess of all the options there, it's hard to pick a favorite because there are pros and cons to each one.
Aren't you allowed, aren't you going to actually, isn't it plan include areas going above Middlefield is almost a clear roadway to the side there? Isn't that where the bike path will be?
I mean, there's essentially like 3 to 4 different segments along San Antonio Road that are all going to require a unique condition. They kind of will, what happens in those areas will kind of spur off of what is decided in this area. But to the north or east, and there are slides that show this, like from Charleston to the freeway, you know, the scenario that we're showing is to have a two-way bike path that connects to the 101 interchange two-way bike path. And then this is Charleston to Middlefield. But this treatment could potentially connect a little bit further south and west. And then it gets into a weird situation where you have San Antonio Avenue and San Antonio Road. And so it'll have a unique situation where on the north side, you eventually get to San Antonio Avenue, which is, you know, a kind of quiet street. It's two-way, and it's separated from San Antonio Road. And then on the south and east side, the eastbound or northbound side, it's a little trickier on what you can do in that area. There's a little bit more constraint. And then we are looking at general improvements to the Nita intersection. So the connection to Caltrain will either happen at Nita or at Alma. And there's a lot of constraints there, and we'll be looking at those in more detail, but there's not really alternatives there. It's just, we got to figure out the puzzle.
Usama, where did you see the conflict? On what is, I think, the north side? Yeah.
You mean with the,
Where is there a pedestrian bike conflict on the north, on that
oh,
side?
on this, alternate 2, for instance, on the bottom left, those are shared bike and pedestrian routes, right? There's no separated pedestrian.
So you'll see there's an image there of a bike and a pedestrian within that same dark gray area, as opposed to option 3, where you have a light gray area for the pedestrians and a separate, just the bike in that same general area. So if they're using the same lanes.
So I'm just curious as to, are there going to be pedestrians in that area, on that side of the street?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
the intent, it'd be a shared path.
It'd be a shared use path.
But, I mean, are they there? I mean, are we building on that? We're not really building on that side.
He's asking if it's going to be used at all for pedestrians.
Yeah.
I mean, you're right, there's less new development unless people are coming from like the Maxar and South Fabian areas, but, they could choose either side of the street to
Right,
do a long distance walk.
right. I mean, I think that unfortunately, the other side, which is a smaller bike lane, is where the density is. And the other side is not. So it's likely to be bicycle, almost all bicycle, because it can relatively easily go all the way up to the station. Is that true? Am I stating it properly?
I mean,
I understand what you're saying, and certainly today, there aren't a lot of pedestrians making use of that sidewalk, at least the times that I've been there, and I've been there all times of the day and evening. What future residents will do is still unknown. Certainly, I think that if we're talking about like 800 San Antonio, they're already on the south side. They're probably not going to cross the street to then walk on the north side unless they wait to the end because they want to use the Alma crossing instead of going through Nita and through the Waymo. You kind of have to go through the Waymo parking lot or around the Waymo building if you don't cross at San Antonio Way or at San Antonio Avenue and Alma to get to the Caltrain station on foot or by bike. So, I think maybe we'll need to map out a little bit more if people are coming from Fabian, are they likely to use that pedestrian route? It's a long walk from Fabian, so there might not be pedestrians coming from there to the Caltrain station. There might only be cyclists or people using transit from that area, so.
That's true. So over in this option, this tree is not the same as this one, right? Because it is moved, shifted over.
that is correct. Alternative 3, pretty much for the length, would require removing existing trees on either side of the street and replanting them in a new location.
It also does look like they've widened the sidewalk and adding 2 feet in between them, and I'm kind of like, is all of that necessary, right? If we're trying to stay within these 2 boundaries here, I feel like you could shrink the sidewalk a little and remove that extra 2 feet between the bike path and the walking, but that's sort of a separate subject.
That's correct. The widening of the sidewalk in Alt 3 is optional. It could be done without widening the sidewalk.
And over in this option, if we did a hybrid of this and this, we could stay within the easement, have 2 lanes of bike plus sidewalk by moving the row of trees. Is that correct?
I mean, yeah, it's a considerable increase in investment to move curb, trees, and such.
And a
Is it
different-
possible? Yes.
different investment to buy all those easements, right? So I'm trying to decide
Yeah.
which way makes more sense.
This upper right is sort of like a very feasible, could be implemented pretty quickly, very inexpensively. Like, in an ideal world, if we're building from scratch, that's sort of the way you want to go. But understanding that we're, fit real-world constraints, it may default to this for the time being. But I think this one is a little bit chaotic, this number 2, because you're sort of, it's like half the road you're leaving, and then the other half the road, you're like tearing up all the trees and doing all this crazy work that, for something that I wouldn't necessarily say is like a huge benefit when you're sharing bikes and people.
But I don't think it's tearing up the trees here because these line up.
Correct.
It's,
Oh, it's the easement.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, fair, thank
so
you.
this one is about easement, this one's about moving trees and easement.
Yeah,
So,
well, maybe, right?
So option
Right,
two,
so-
option 2 does have some pinch points, but we likely wouldn't remove the trees. We would just engineer around those pinch points, but there's not very many of them. And the trees along the road that are next to the parking lane could remain exactly as they are in option 2. In option 3, because we're moving the curb, we're going to have to move all the trees that exist. And exactly as Board Member Rosenberg mentioned, that's how we approach that is we have one alternative that is easy to do, it is cost efficient, it is not ideal from a cyclist perspective, but it is something we could do quickly and for much less money. Option 3 is if we didn't have anything there today, that's what our Office of Transportation would recommend that we put in. And then so option 2 is something that our consultants came up with that said, this kind of addresses both concerns about cost and about safety and gives us another alternative. Could we do, as you were suggesting, half of option 3 and half of option 2 on one side? Yeah, we could make that work as well. If you think that moving the curb on the north side to create those bike lanes is valuable, but on the south side, you would rather just remove the parking and have the bike lane at street level, that's an option that isn't shown here, but would work as well, if that's your recommendation.
that's kind of, just thinking about like, where are people biking to? Because if people are biking to the Caltrain station and put their bikes on the train and go to San Francisco, which happens quite a bit, my husband does that every day, that's, a direction that works, right? Versus going north is if you're riding across the new VTA and taking the Bay Trail, riding up, seems like maybe a lesser traffic direction, so the one of these is probably sufficient. But you're at some point crossing over here anyway to make that crossing, right? So this side is feels to me like intuitively probably a lesser used bike lane, and therefore it makes sense to do it that way. And looking at the school maps too, most of the kids are going towards the Palo Alto schools and hopefully riding on that side of the street. So I'm more inclined to make the left side, the north side, be very much a safe bike route for going to Caltrain, going up to Bayshore Lane, to Bay Trail, versus the south side is a minimally used bike lane. So that's kind of my inclination of the hybrid.
Any other additional comments on this? If not, we can conclude our discussion for this subject. And thank you so much for your hard work and the comprehensive report. It's really very informative and lots of information to digest. With that, we will just adjourn today's meeting. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.